You were born into a shape. Not a story, not a sound, but a shape. It was there before language, before memory, before even your name. The circle. It appeared soft, harmless, a loop, a rhythm, a whole. But within that perfection, within that unbroken loop, was the first lesson you never knew you learned. Return. You were taught to return before you were taught to leave. Cribs are circles. Mobiles above your head rotate in gentle loops. Rattles spin, bottles round. The first toys you reached for rolled back. Every gesture met with a curve, an arc, a path that led you not forward, but around, around and around, again and again. This, you were told, was soothing. But what begins as comfort calcifies into command. We say the circle is eternal, but we rarely ask what that eternity costs. Because eternity, when designed, is a trap without walls. The circle does not push, it pulls. Its power is not in threat, but in enclosure. Not in direction, but in repetition. It doesn't tell you where to go. It convinces you you've already been there. Even the first rituals you obeyed were shaped like circles. Sit here, face the center, gather round. The circle taught us to belong, not by connection, but by alignment, everyone facing in, no one facing out. The geometry of inclusion that erases escape. You thought the circle was about unity, it was about containment. It appears in sacred texts and secular contracts, halos, wreaths, rings, logos. Each time it whispers a promise. This is complete. Each time it hides a threat. Do not break it. A ring binds fingers. A seal closes a document. A coin tells you what has value. A steering wheel pretends you're in control. Circles became the quiet grammar of permission. The dot inside a circle on your phone tells you to stop recording. The spinning wheel tells you to wait. The button you press to agree is always round-edged, pleasing, confirming. Circular icons promise continuity, but continuity for whom? Roundabouts erase sharp turns. You enter and are swept along. Traffic management without traffic resistance. It doesn't tell you where to go. It tells you how to keep going. Loop, not leap. And what of the camera lens? The pupil, the eye, all round, all watching. The circle is the original gaze, the closed loop of surveillance. You stare into it, it stares back. But which came first, the watcher or the watched? Consider the clock. Circular, unforgiving, the illusion of cycles dressed as rhythm. The second hand doesn't progress, it returns. The hour loops back, not because it chooses to, but because we built it that way. And now your life follows its choreography. Wake, work, wait, sleep, repeat. You are told this is routine. You are told this is order. But it is rotation, circular motion mistaken for forward momentum. Even in conversation, we are taught to speak in circles to be polite, to circle back, to close the loop. Progress is redefined as recursion. We don't finish thoughts, we orbit them. And what of beliefs? The same arguments, the same stories, the same mythologies with new names, recycled icons, old symbols, rebranded, rewrapped, repeated. We are not moving forward. We are circling. Your mind, too, has a loop, the default mode network, that endless hum of inner narration. The same patterns of thought traced like a compass needle never settling. Doubt, justification, regret, desire, all swirling. No exit, no final note. Just return. You call this overthinking, but maybe it's a circle drawn too many times into your thought stream to notice. They taught you that the circle meant safety, but they never told you what it kept out. Edges, endings, decisions, escape. Because to step outside the circle is not rebellion, it is disorientation. Lines are linear. They imply a before and after. They are judged by where they begin and where they end. But a circle erases origin. You never know where it started. So you never ask where it's going. The circle is a shape that rewrites time. In ancient rituals, the circle was drawn to protect, to keep the sacred in and the profane out. But now it protects systems, it protects control, the boardroom, the round table, the rotating chair, hierarchy hidden beneath geometry. Even protests gather in circles. We chant to the rhythm of the ring. We march in loops, cordoned off by barricades shaped like arcs. The illusion of motion, the illusion of voice, spirals pretending to be lines. And when the circle breaks, when someone steps out, they are no longer included. They are out of the loop. Language betrays the geometry. The one who leaves is the one who is lost. The one who questions is the one who has broken the symmetry. And so the circle defends itself with soft aggression, not punishment, exclusion. We don't imprison in squares. We imprison in loops. Even dreams spin. You've had them. The dream where you're walking but never arrive. The staircase that curves. The hallway that loops back to itself. A subconscious shaped like a spiral, unrolling, unfolding, and never finishing. You call it a nightmare. But it is geometry doing what it was designed to do, keep you inside. So where is the line, the one that leaves the circle behind? It may be thought, it may be doubt, it may be silence, because the circle cannot hold what it cannot hear. To leave the circle is to accept rupture, discontinuity, truth without symmetry, but also freedom, because obedience is smooth, but truth is jagged. So now as you close your eyes and feel the pulse of thought return to its rotation, ask, what circles do I live within? What beliefs have no edges? What rhythms have I followed so long they've become invisible? You don't have to shatter the circle. You only have to see it, and in seeing it, you have already stepped beyond it. It doesn't ask, it points, and you follow. Not because you understand where it leads, not because you agree, but because you've always followed. The arrow appears simple, a line with a tip, an idea of movement. But within its geometry lies your obedience. It is the most commanding shape ever drawn, the most unquestioned authority you've ever met. From childhood, it has led you. Through corridors, across screens, down pages, around corners. Every sign you've ever trusted was tipped with a triangle. Every interface you've ever touched whispered direction with lines that narrowed into certainty. You never doubted it. You never paused to ask, why this way? The arrow does not explain. It assumes, and in that assumption, it governs. You see it on signs, and you move. You see it on screens, and you scroll. You see it on maps, and you shift your whole body toward its intent. It has no voice, no emotion, but it commands with precision. Obedience by geometry. The arrow is not a guide, it is a boundary. When it points, it eliminates all other possibilities, not through argument, through implication, through contrast. The arrow says, this way, only this way. Don't look back. And because it's clean, because it's sharp, because it appears efficient, you trust it. Arrows gave order to chaos. War maps, road systems, supply chains, postal networks, conquest. They marched across paper long before they marched across borders. And you were taught that following the arrow was progress, but was it, or was it merely forward? And is forward always right? Consider how many decisions you've made just because the arrow pointed that way. Click here, enter, swipe, submit. Even the smallest triangle on your screen carries silent force. It does not ask for consent. It frames choice as inevitability. Arrows taught your body how to move. The cursor becomes a pointer. Your eyes track what it aims toward. Your finger follows. Your will concedes. Even your thoughts bow to the arrow. In flowcharts, in timelines, in logic trees, your reasoning traces arrows like circuits, believing movement is clarity, believing sequence is truth. But truth does not always arrive in sequence, and clarity does not always point forward. Sometimes the arrow simply bypasses nuance. It does not dwell in complexity. It aims, and aiming is not understanding. The triangle in the arrow is a wedge, a tool of division, a tool of war, a blade disguised as a direction. When it enters a thought, it splits. When it enters a space, it divides. And yet we decorate with arrows. We animate with them. We cheer when they go up. We mourn when they go down. Progress becomes a symbol, and the symbol becomes a spell. You no longer ask where you're going, only whether the arrow is pointing up. We have built entire ideologies around this. Up and to the right is now synonymous with success. Graphs, stocks, views, influence. The arrow ascends, and so must we. But what if the ascent leads nowhere? What if the pursuit of forward has bent our path into a loop? The arrow implies linearity. But life is not a line, nor is thought, nor is love, nor is truth. Yet the arrow shapes our decisions as if they must be linear. If you're not going forward, you're falling behind. If you're not improving, you're failing. If you're not climbing, you're irrelevant. This is not truth. It is narrative drawn by arrows. And we've bowed to it, not because we believed, but because it was easier than asking, what else is there? Even in our gestures, we repeat the shape. We point, we direct, we command. We call it nonverbal communication. But it is mimicry, the body internalizing the symbol. The arm becomes the arrow, the hand becomes its tip. Power is directional, and direction, we've learned, belongs to those who point. You were not born to point. You were born to wonder. But the arrow silences wonder with velocity. It promises resolution. It promises destination. And in chasing it, we forget that some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some thoughts are meant to be circled, sat with, turned over, not shot through. And yet here we are, a society of archers, launching opinions like arrows, firing truths across voids, hoping they land somewhere meaningful, but rarely asking what damage they might do. We are taught to lead by pointing, but leading with direction is not the same as leading with vision, because the arrow knows only one thing: movement. It does not reflect. It does not soften. It does not pause. And perhaps this is why we crave it. In a world of uncertainty, the arrow gives false clarity. In a world of noise, it gives false order. It tells us there is a way, but never if that way is good, never if it is yours. And so we bow, we click, we scroll, we obey, not because we must, but because the arrow is already pointing, and we were taught never to question once it points. But tonight, let's pause. Let the arrow freeze mid-flight. Let the triangle unhook from its line. Let the direction dissolve, and let the space open. Because beneath every arrow is a map that was not drawn. Beneath every point is a possibility unexplored. You do not have to move forward. You do not have to move at all. You can stay. You can look in all directions, not just the one given. You can ask, who drew this line? Why does it only go one way? And most importantly, do I still want to follow it? Because you were not born to obey geometry. You were born to create it. And that begins the moment you stop bowing and start seeing. It was once just a gesture. The hand reached out in offering, in warning, in touch. It was open. It moved with intent, but without instruction. You saw it before you had language. The first thing you followed wasn't a voice. It was a hand, reaching toward you, guiding your gaze, silencing your cries. It began as care. But slowly, silently, the hand changed, from gesture to signal, from signal to rule. It stopped reaching and began pointing. It stopped waving and began pressing. It drew lines, held pens, stamped orders, and you began to obey. Not because it demanded, but because it moved with certainty. The hand became the first law you listened to, the original interface, the silent instructor, not of what to think, but how to move, what to touch, what to fear, what to reach for. You were taught to raise it in class, to swear with it in court, to place it over your heart in allegiance. What other body part carries such solemnity? The voice may lie, but the hand, they said, reveals the truth. Yet what happens when the hand is no longer a gesture, but a grid? Open your phone. What do you see? A screen designed for touch. Your thumb becomes an extension of will, but the motion is preordained. You swipe not freely but along invisible rails. You press, but only where you are allowed to. You call this interaction, but it is choreography. The hand does not act, it performs. It taps, drags, scrolls, but always within bounds, always in patterns someone else set. The touch screen does not just respond, it rewards. It feeds back sensation, haptic applause, micro vibrations of control, and your hand learns the dance. Gesture becomes grammar, and grammar becomes law. Each flick, each pinch, each long press, a clause in a contract you never read. You do not write the rules of this interaction. You learn them through repetition. The interface is not neutral. It disciplines the body. Once the hand shaped the world. It carved stone, it sowed seed, it held the tools of transformation. Now it obeys glass, it is trained to trace loops, to mimic choice, but the options were already laid out. Press here, agree here, swipe to accept. The hand has been absorbed into the system, a biometric, a password, a signature, and with it your will. When did your fingerprint become a key? When did your hand become proof? It opens doors now without asking questions. A scan, a wave, a tap. You are told this is convenience, but it is also conversion. You have been converted from person to user. and the hand is the bridge. Even in silence, the hand speaks. A fist means rage. An open palm means peace. A raised hand means attention. But meaning, too, has become stylized. The emoji, the icon, the simplified gesture rendered as a symbol. It is no longer enough to feel. You must display, signal, performance, and the hand becomes the avatar of intent, a brand of self. Even protest is organized through hands, raised in crowds, painted on posters, pixelated in timelines. The hand is always there. But what does it mean to raise your hand? It once meant you wished to speak. Now it means you are waiting for permission. You've internalized the law so deeply that you ask for space inside of silence. You hold your arm aloft and hope to be called on, to be selected, to be seen. Even when you raise your voice, the hand remains a prerequisite. No matter how loud you are, the hand must go first. It has become ritual, and rituals, once learned, become structure, not questioned, just enacted. But not all hands guide. Some restrain, some close, some become fists. Power is not always about force. Sometimes it is about gesture. Who gestures first? Who decides which hands can reach and which hands must be still? When the king extends his hand, it is mercy. When the worker lifts theirs, it is demand. We've built hierarchies on the choreography of hands. Some are clean, some are dirty, some are holy, some are bound. Even the absence of the hand has meaning. In a world governed by touch, what does it mean not to be touched? To be ignored, to never feel the pressure of another's palm. There is a silence in untouchability, and silence, too, can be law. The hand has become symbol, signature, password, protest, product, icon. But it was once just yours. It once moved without design. It once reached toward things no one told you to want. Before you were instructed, before you were encoded. The hand was curiosity. Now it is compliance. We wear watches on our wrists, measuring not just time, but productivity, steps, metrics, targets. The hand is now timed. It is tracked. It is optimized. Even gestures are mined for data. We no longer shake hands. We scan them. We no longer hold hands. We text instead. We no longer trust hands. Because hands are human, and humanity has become messy. So we digitize, we automate, we design away from flesh. And yet, when we grieve, we still reach out. When we love, we still hold. When we fall, we still extend. The hand remembers, even when it's forgotten, even when it's trained, even when it's restrained. It remembers softness, gesture, meaning without command. So tonight, as your hands rest beside you, open them. Feel the absence of the screen. Feel the memory of motion not tied to instruction. Let your fingers drift like branches, like questions. Not to swipe, not to scroll, not to signal. Just to be, because when the hand is no longer a law, it becomes a language again, and maybe a prayer. Before you enter a room, you read its face, not a face with eyes or breath or blood, but a symbol, a placard, a number, a shape, a word. The door does not speak, but it communicates, it assigns, it separates, It declares what is allowed, and more quietly, what is not. You never walk through a door without first bowing to its label. You might not notice it, but you see it. You register the icon, the color, the typeface. Your body responds before your thoughts do. The mind slows, the shoulders shift, the breath adjusts. The door has already told you how to enter, and who you must be when you do. That's the first trick. Not that doors keep people out, but that they shape who you are on the way in. A restroom marked with two symbols, one triangle dressed, one squared, splits a body into binaries. You choose not where to go, but what you are. And you choose quickly, reflexively, not because you believe, but because it's what you were trained to see. And in that training, the door becomes a mask, not one you wear on your face, but one worn on space. Every threshold is a costume change. Before the classroom door, you become a student. Before the office door, you become a function. Before the bedroom, a self. Before the closet, a secret. Before the confession booth, a sinner. Before the courtroom, a role. Each entry scripted, each passage marked. The door is not just a wall with a hinge. It is a filter. You do not enter unchanged. Doors have always been this way. They have always known how to speak. Long before locks, there were signs, charms above thresholds, wards carved into wood, mezuzahs, lintels, blood marks, family crests. These were not decorations, they were declarations. This is who belongs here. This is who must stay out. Now we call them logos, buzzers, keypads, color-coded passes, but the meaning is the same. To cross a door is to submit to its terms. You don't think about it, but you perform it daily. A sign says, "Employees only," and you look away even when no one's watching. Another says, "Push," but your instinct is to pull, and for a second you hesitate. Not because the door resists, but because the symbol told you something else. You trust the symbol over your own hand. This is how deeply you've been trained. Symbols on doors are not requests. They are silent authorities. And yet they feel mundane. Office numbers, restroom icons, elevator arrows, do not enter. Caution, authorized personnel. They blend into architecture, but they sculpt your behavior. They choreograph movement without confrontation. That is their genius. The door never needs to speak, it just needs to label. And once labeled, we obey. But what happens to the spaces without symbols? Rooms without names, doors without instructions. We call them abandoned, forgotten, unsafe. We fear the unmarked, because without a label, there is no script. And without a script, there is freedom. And freedom is frightening. So we cling to the meaning on every door. We ask buildings to assign us roles. We want the elevator to tell us where we're going. We want the floor number, the department, the destination. We want each hallway to resolve its ambiguity with a plaque. And if a door lacks a name, we hesitate, we knock softly, we wonder if we're allowed. We've learned that permission is printed, that belonging is labeled. So we wait for signage, even in our minds. We create inner doors, each with its own marker. This is where I store pain. This is where I hide desire. This is where anger goes. This is the door I never open. Each belief assigned a room. each emotion housed behind metaphoric walls. You do not cross between them freely. You wait until you're told it's the right time, the appropriate context. You've learned to compartmentalize, to believe that healing happens only when a certain sign is posted on the door. Even memory lives behind labeled doors. You revisit only what you're ready to see. You peek through keyholes. You dress old moments with new names you forget, not because you can't remember, but because the door was closed and marked private. But here's the question. Who put the signs there? Who wrote the meaning? Who decided that a triangle means woman, that a dollar sign means value, that a red circle with a line means no? The answer is no one and everyone. Meaning is not born. It's constructed, repeated, absorbed. And when repeated enough, it hardens into truth. So now the signs on the doors feel natural, but they are not. They are echoes, echoes of design, of culture, of power. They are inherited masks, stuck to walls, not to faces, but more permanent, more trusted. And this is the danger. You stop asking what's behind the door. You only ask what it says. If the label is unfamiliar, you turn away. If it says, men, and you are not, you walk elsewhere. If it says, staff, and you are not, you retreat. You do not test the knob. You do not knock. You trust the mask. Even when it lies. Especially when it lies. The mask of meaning on every door doesn't just restrict access, it restricts imagination. It tells you what a space must be, what must happen there. A church door whispers, reverence. A prison door hums despair, a bank door vibrates with surveillance. You feel these signals before you even cross the threshold. Not because the door told you what's inside, but because the sign already wrote the script, and you agreed to play your part. But what if the script is wrong? What if behind the restroom sign marked men is someone crying quietly? What if behind the employees-only door is an empty hallway? What if the room marked conference holds silence instead of ideas? We assign meaning, but meaning drifts. Signs fade, rooms change, people shift. But the signs rarely do, and so we trust a mask that no longer fits. We perform to labels that no longer describe. We obey spaces that no longer serve. And we call this order. We call this civilization. But maybe it's just inertia. Maybe it's time to peel the signs off the doors. Not to erase meaning, but to invite new ones. To let the room speak for itself. To enter without knowing. To cross thresholds without scripts. Not all doors need instructions. Not all spaces need symbols. Sometimes the most honest room is the one unmarked. Sometimes the truest self is the one that steps through anyway. So tonight, as the world narrows into stillness and the rooms you move through grow dim, imagine a door without a mask. No name, no icon, no rule, only possibility. You reach for the handle, and this time you enter without permission. And in doing so, you begin to remember. The door was never the authority. You were. There are patterns etched into everything around you, into walls, into sidewalks, into fabric, into thought. They hum with quiet repetition, too soft to hear, until they've already been obeyed. You never gave them permission, but they were accepted anyway. Because patterns don't ask, They just return, and return, and return. Your eyes adjust to them, your body orients toward them, your choices lean in their direction. Not because they are true, but because they are there. They began early. Chevron prints on your baby blanket, the looping curls of wallpaper, the cadence of lullabies, the rhythm of footsteps down the hall. You didn't understand them. You absorbed them. And absorption over time becomes agreement. That's the quiet tyranny of the pattern. It doesn't argue. It settles. It repeats until your silence becomes assent. You don't remember saying yes. You don't remember being asked. But still, you follow. The cracks in the pavement guide your steps. You avoid them, not because you fear breaking your mother's back, but because your body remembers games you didn't know were teachings. Your hand moves along ruled paper. Your handwriting conforms to boxes. You align thoughts in bullet points, grid cells, frameworks. You didn't invent this geometry. It was handed to you. And once given, never questioned. Why do you trust the straight line? Why does a perfect grid feel so safe? You walk into a room and instinctively face the same direction as everyone else. Sit where the pattern implies. You don't ask why the chairs are in rows. You don't ask why the screen is always in front. It's easier to follow than to rearrange. Because breaking a pattern is more unsettling than agreeing with one. Even if you don't understand it. Even if you don't like it. We worship symmetry. We treat repetition as wisdom. We mistake recurrence for reliability. And so patterns colonize our lives, not just in visuals, but in habits. Wake, check phone, coffee, scroll, sigh, commute, work, lunch, repeat. The brain, loving efficiency, automates. It carves grooves into your behavior. It tells you this is easier. It rewards you with familiarity. And so you stop deciding. You perform. Not because you lack will, but because you've been patterned. Even your emotions follow loops. Sadness followed by comfort food. Frustration followed by silence. Loneliness followed by screens. You call them coping mechanisms. But what if they're just inherited rituals? Patterns passed down through culture, through advertising, through childhood. Your mother reacted that way. Your teacher praised that script. Your world reinforced that cycle. And now it plays in you. You didn't approve it. But it got approved anyway. You've been dressed in patterns, too. Polka dots, stripes, camouflage, tartan. Clothing tells you where you belong. Tells others who to expect. Whether you're part of the office, the protest, the playground, or the ceremony. A pattern becomes identity. Or worse, replaces it. And still we rarely notice. Because patterns don't demand attention. They demand submission. The more invisible they become, the more powerful they are. That's how conditioning works. That's how systems sustain. You repeat, not because it's best, but because it's known. Even your thoughts are shaped by cognitive patterns, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, confirmation bias, rehearsed regrets, mental loops dressed as logic, the same sentences playing over and over again, pretending to be insight, but they're just comfortable, predictable, internalized. You say, I always do this. You say, that's just how I am. But maybe it's just how the pattern is, and maybe it's not you at all. You see, patterns are efficient, but they're not always right. They simplify, but they also flatten. They cut out exceptions. They cut out you. Not everything that's repeated is worthy. Not every loop leads to clarity. Some just keep spinning because no one dares to interrupt. And what if you tried? What if you disrupted one, skipped the step, reversed the order, dressed against the code, spoke against the tone? It wouldn't feel like liberation. It would feel like error. Because the first reaction to breaking a pattern is discomfort. And so we return. Not to truth, but to rhythm, because rhythm feels like sense. But some rhythms lie, some rhythms bind. We crave patterns in the sky, in traffic, in days of the week, in love. We turn every random occurrence into narrative. We ask the universe for signs. We arrange tarot cards. We look for numbers that repeat. We interpret dreams not for meaning, but for patterns. Because pattern comforts. Even when it deceives, even when it limits, it gives us the illusion of knowing. But that knowing is shallow. It skips complexity. It makes mystery manageable, but not real. Patterns don't just live in action. They live in expectation. You expect people to behave a certain way, not because it's fair, but because that's the pattern you've seen. You expect your life to move a certain direction, not because it's right, but because that's the trajectory you've absorbed. You expect pain to follow joy, or betrayal to follow love, or failure to follow risk. Not because the world works that way, but because your mind has made a groove deep enough to echo. And the echo sounds like prophecy. But it's just pattern, and pattern is not fate. It's only habit, and habits can be unlearned. But unlearning is not glamorous. It is uncomfortable, disorienting. It requires silence, attention, presence, because in silence patterns reveal themselves. In stillness you begin to hear the loop, not just the song you hum, but the one that hums you. That's when change becomes possible. That's when the pattern loses its spell. Not by force, but by awareness. You start to ask, why this rhythm? Why this shape? Why this loop? And if you ask enough, the pattern begins to fray. And what lies beyond the fray? A pause, an opening, a path that was always there, just not repeated enough to be trusted. Until now. So tonight, in this moment where thought softens and control loosens, notice the rhythm you didn't choose, the loop you never questioned, the thoughts that don't belong to you, but arrived through repetition. And with that noticing comes something strange, something rare. You, not the you shaped by pattern, but the one who watches, the one who interrupts, the one who dares to write a different rhythm. A rhythm made not from inheritance, but from intention. You saw it once, but not while awake. It came in sleep, quiet, slow, precise. A symbol etched not in ink or stone, but in the folds of a dream, in the blur between thought and forgetting. You didn't remember it at first. You just woke up feeling watched, not by eyes, by meaning without context, a presence behind the veil, a message that hadn't yet translated, but lingered. And that is how it begins, not with recognition, but with residue. A shape appears in your sleep, perhaps drawn in sand, perhaps pulsing in light, perhaps repeating in the background, just behind the dream's foreground, a flicker, a fragment. You don't question it. Because in dreams, nothing is questioned. You follow it. You bow to it. You allow it to guide. Not because you know what it is, but because it feels familiar. It feels like a return. You wake and forget the specifics, but your behavior has already shifted. You find yourself avoiding certain paths, repeating numbers, feeling unease in certain rooms. You hesitate at thresholds, unsure why. The sign has done its work. It didn't need to be remembered, only absorbed. You may never name it, you may never sketch it, but it moved through you, like a spell cast in sleep. And who can argue with what the dreaming self consents to? Who can question what was felt, but not seen? Dreams are the oldest theater of the symbol, the first screen, the original broadcast. Long before you could read, you were decoding these nightly glyphs, smoke in air, oceans that become staircases, clocks that melt, voices that whisper your name from behind mirrors. We are taught to dismiss them. But what if your dreams aren't random? What if they're saturated with signs that waited for your guard to lower, waited until the critical voice softened, until the logic lines blurred? Because waking hours are armored, sleep is porous, and what slips in during sleep can change how you move when you're awake. A recurring shape, a door that doesn't open, a hand pointing to the left, always to the left, a tower with no stairs, a circle around a flame. You try to dismiss them, but they appear again and again, cloaked in different dream stories, but anchored to the same design. The sign isn't trying to frighten you, it's trying to speak. But symbols don't shout, they echo, especially the ones from dreams. You don't learn them, you remember them, as if they were waiting. Maybe they were. Maybe your dreaming mind is not merely producing content, but receiving it. And if so, from where, from whom? Is it possible that memory moves backward, that meaning arrives before context, that symbols precede the stories we fit them into? Some cultures knew this. The ancient ones recorded dream signs as sacred messages, glyphs from gods, warnings from ancestors, or internal revelations painted with external form. They would wake and draw what they saw, even if they didn't understand. Especially if they didn't understand. They knew that signs do not wait to be interpreted, they wait to be witnessed. And you've seen these signs. In the pause between sleep and wake, in the moment when your eyes are open, but your logic has not yet taken over. In that flickering overlap where metaphor and memory dissolve together, there it is again. The triangle inside the sun, the door that turns into a clock, the eye inside a bird's wing. The symbol appears, not to control, but to remind. But remind what? That meaning exists before permission, that not all knowledge is logical, that some truths arrive sideways, through windows, not doors, and that signs seen in sleep can shape how you carry yourself in daylight. They might lead you to places you've never been, but feel like you've returned to. They might nudge you to say the thing you've avoided, or help you recognize the pattern you didn't know was repeating. Dream signs are mirrors that don't reflect. They refract. They bend you toward the unspeakable, the unnameable, the real. But you were taught to shrug them off, to say, just a dream, to dismiss the strange consistency of an image that keeps reappearing. But why does it? Why that shape? Why that gesture? Why that color always in the same part of the dream? Perhaps it is not just a dream. Perhaps it is an arrival, a slow unveiling of the language your subconscious never forgot, because you didn't invent these symbols. They're older than you, older than civilization, older than language. They've passed through countless minds, each one adding meaning, stripping meaning, layering stories like sediment. And now they find you, not with violence, but with repetition. They knock on the walls of your sleep, not loudly, but consistently. A symbol does not need to be explained to affect you. You don't need to understand the cross to feel its weight. You don't need to decode the spiral to feel its pull. You don't need to translate the dream to move differently the next day, because that's what signs do. They don't ask for belief, they generate behavior, even unnoticed, especially unnoticed. Some signs in dreams are warnings, some are maps, some are archetypes rising up from the deep, some are personal, some are universal. But all are invitations, invitations to pause, to look again, to wonder what's whispering behind your thoughts. Because not all messages come as sentences. Some arrive as shapes, some as moments of unexplainable stillness, some as images that won't leave your mind no matter how many distractions you throw at them. And those are the ones worth honoring. Not because they are real in the way science demands, but because they are real in the way that memory is, in the way that longing is, in the way that the quiet certainty of "I've seen this before" is. So tonight, as your body sinks and your thoughts begin to blur, pay attention to what returns, to what shimmers on the edge of logic, to what seems too precise to be random. Let the symbol arrive. Let it speak in its own language. Don't chase it. Just witness. Let it leave its mark. Not on the dream, but on you. Because even if you don't remember in the morning, it remembers you. It's waiting, always waiting, just behind the veil. The first thing you learn about any space is how to leave it. Not where the windows are, not who's inside, not even why you came, but how to get out. And the sign is always there, waiting, lit in red, hung above a door. A word, not a sentence. Exit. Simple, silent, unchanging. But have you ever really looked at it? Have you ever wondered why that word glows brighter than all the rest? Why it's always there, even when everything else goes dark? Why it's always red? Not red like blood or roses or rage, red like command, like interruption, like finality. The exit sign is not just guidance, it's declaration. There is a way out. But whose idea of out is this? And where does it actually lead? You follow the arrow beneath it, through hallways you've never noticed before, into stairwells that spiral endlessly, doors that lead into more doors. You begin to realize the exit is not a place. It's a promise, a symbol of potential more than conclusion, a tether to the idea that escape is always available if you only follow the signs. But what if the signs are looping? What if the exit doesn't exit? What if it merely recycles you? From one room to another, from one system to the next, out of the fire drill and into the lobby, out of the dream and into another illusion, out of the job and into the next performance. We don't escape, we transfer. And still the red word follows. glowing above every stage, every auditorium, every hallway in every institution you've ever trusted. You grow up beneath that word. You sit through lessons and sermons and speeches while its glow hums above your head like a quiet guardian or a silent threat. It is always lit, even when nothing else is. Why? Because even design acknowledges collapse, even architecture anticipates fear. The exit sign is the room's admission that things might go wrong, that panic might arise, that someone someday will need to run, and when that day comes, the symbol will not blink. It will not change. It will remain. But this permanence is strange, isn't it? Because most signs tell you what to do now. The exit tells you what to do when you can no longer stay. It is a sign of last resort, of rupture, of break, and yet you walk past it every day without noticing, not because it's unimportant, but because you've been trained to filter it out. Your eyes glide over it. Your brain logs it as familiar. It hides in plain sight, like all symbols of emergency, like all instructions we hope never to follow. But the mind registers it even when the eyes don't, just like trauma, just like grief, just like all the exits you've taken in life, without doors, without signs, without applause. Because not all exits are marked. Some happen in silence. The moment you stop loving someone and don't know why, the second you realize a place no longer fits you, the gradual fade from belief into doubt. No lights, no arrows, just the sense that you are no longer in something, and you don't know where you've gone. Exit. Even the word itself is strange. Not leave, not escape, not end. Exit. A noun pretending to be a verb, a thing, not an action. As if the act of leaving is no longer yours, but the room's. The exit isn't something you do, it's something that waits. And in that waiting, it accumulates meaning. It becomes symbolic. The exit becomes the boundary between known and unknown, between safety and danger, between habit and freedom. Some people fear the exit, others chase it. Some spend their lives standing beneath it, afraid to walk through. Others barrel past it only to realize the room they entered is just another version of the one they left. But what if the exit isn't external? What if it's psychological? What if it's emotional? A way out of the pattern, a release from the loop. Not a door, but a decision. The exit sign you see on the wall. Is that any different from the one that appears in a dream? A glowing word, a final choice, a way forward disguised as a way out? Or is it a symbol implanted in your subconscious so deeply that even your dreams obey fire codes? Even your nightmares need compliance. You dream of running, and the red sign appears. You don't question it. You just follow, like you always have. Because exits are choreography, and you've been rehearsing since childhood. The theater teaches you, in case of emergency, follow the light. But what if the emergency is quiet? What if the fire is internal? What if the thing burning is you? You look around, nothing is on fire, but everything is wrong. So you scan for the word. You find it, there, high up, always red. You move toward it. But where does it take you? To a job change, to a breakup, to a relocation, to a withdrawal, to silence, to sleep. Even death, some say, is just a final exit. But even that is a story, a sign painted in meaning. because we are so desperate to believe that there's always a way out, even from time, even from suffering, even from ourselves. The exit reassures us that there is still agency, that there is a door, even if we haven't yet walked through it. But what if we stopped looking for exits? What if the answer isn't escape? What if the room must be faced? What if the pain must be felt? What if the exit is only a mirror reflecting back our refusal to stay? Because not every space must be fled, and not every end must be chased. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remain. Remain with the discomfort. Remain in the truth. Remain until the room teaches you what it came to teach. Because the exit sign will always be there. It doesn't need you to look. It only needs you to know. And that knowing is what haunts you, what comforts you, what waits for you. Even now, in the darkness, in the quiet, a red whisper above the door frame, saying, "Whenever you're ready." There is a presence, not a face, not a figure, not a body, but it watches. It does not blink, it does not breathe, it does not move, yet it sees. You feel it in spaces where nothing seems wrong, but nothing feels free. In waiting rooms, in hallways, in parking lots, in terms and conditions you don't read. It is there, the shape that watches without form. Not because it is invisible, but because it is abstract. It hides in the triangle inside a triangle, in the pixelated pupil of a camera icon, in the tiny dot above a lowercase I. It is the I that is not an I, the watcher designed to feel familiar, comforting, necessary, and so you welcome it. You let it inside. You let it onto your phone, into your home, across your face, beneath your fingerprints. You do not resist, because it does not threaten. It indicates, it hovers unobtrusively at the corner of your interface. You recognize the shape, a lens, a curve, a soft circular mimicry of perception, and with that recognition comes permission. But what have you granted? What sees through this symbol? What gaze is hiding in the glyph? Surveillance was once obvious, armed, armored, declared. Now it is subtle, stylized, aesthetic, wrapped in icons and branded in grayscale. The shape of surveillance now looks like design. It looks like trust. But the shape is not passive. It remembers. It logs. It loops. It becomes part of the room's architecture. Not furniture, not wall. Something deeper. It's the sense of being evaluated without being seen. The feeling that there is a right way to be in the room, even if no one's watching. But someone or something is, always. This is not paranoia. This is pattern. Because you've learned to act for the invisible gaze, to edit your sentences mid-post, to position your body mid-selfie, to adjust your tone in digital spaces, even when you're alone. You move through life watched by a formless presence made of code, commerce, and cultural expectation. And the shape that contains it, you've seen it before. A circle open on one side, a diamond with a pupil, an upward-pointing triangle inside a rectangle. It shifts, but it always means the same thing. You are being seen. We used to believe that seeing was sacred. To be seen was to be known. Now, seeing is extraction. To be seen is to be processed, measured, categorized, sold. The eye of the algorithm does not see you, it scans you, not for who you are, but for what you can become, for what you might click, consume, repeat. This watcher is predictive, and its symbols are everywhere. A camera icon on a locked screen, a blinking light near your laptop's lens, a square frame around a face during autofocus. Each a reminder, this moment isn't just happening, it's being recorded, archived, filed, not by a person, by the system. The shape that watches without form does not need intention. It needs only function. Its gaze does not rest, because it is not looking, it is calculating. You walk into a store and are already a data point. You pass a billboard and it shifts based on your past behavior. You open your feed and the eye behind the screen adjusts the rhythm of what you see. You call it a smart experience, but maybe it's just a mirror, polished to the point of forgetting who owns the reflection. We used to know who was watching. A teacher in a classroom, a guard in a tower, a stranger on a bench. Now the watcher has no face, no presence, no accountability, just interface, just design. The watching is embedded in the shape itself, the form you agreed to when you clicked, I accept. The fine print wrapped in white curves and grayscale symbols. You think it's just part of the layout. But the layout is instruction. The shape is behavioral. You've stopped resisting it. You perform for it, smiling at cameras you'll never see the footage of, curating your movements as if every moment might be reviewed. And maybe it will. Maybe it already has been. You weren't warned. You were invited. Invited to tag yourself, to share your location, to announce your emotions with a drop-down menu. This isn't surveillance, it's participation. That's the new shape of the watcher. It doesn't hide, it asks, and you say yes, again and again. Because to resist it is to fall behind. To go dark is to disappear, to become unsearchable. And in this age, visibility is survival. But what is lost when you are always visible? What dies in the light? The private self, the contradictory self, the self that exists only when unmeasured. There are parts of you that bloom only in shadow, that require absence from gaze. But the shape that watches without form never looks away. It floats through your life like a quiet god, unjudging, but not neutral, unblinking, but not blind. Its judgment is built into the system. Its morality is data-driven. Its eyes are metrics. Its memory is endless. And what does that mean for your soul? When every moment is legible, when every movement is trackable, when even your dreams are mined for preference, you look into a security camera and feel nothing, but it feels you. You don't know its shape anymore, because it no longer needs one. It has melted into the architecture of perception. It is in the app, in the logo, in the passive consent of your morning scroll. And so it watches, not maliciously, mechanically. You are not its target, you are its input. But tonight, in the hush between thoughts, you can begin to notice it, not to fear it, but to name it, to recognize the shape without form, and to ask, what would I do if I were unobserved? What would I become if I were unseen? Who lives in the spaces outside the watcher's field? The answers may not arrive quickly, but they do exist, and perhaps they begin the moment you turn away, not from the symbol --, but from its spell. Before you chose, you responded. Before you spoke, you obeyed. Before you understood a symbol, you reacted to it. Not with thought, but with recognition, with something older than logic. Your body already knew. Your breath slowed when the lights dimmed. Your hand reached for the green. You hesitated at the red. Your eyes lingered on the triangle, even though you hadn't learned the word warning, because your mind had already mapped it. Before the alphabet, there were shapes. Before rules, there were patterns. Before memory, there was response. Your nervous system is older than your culture, and it was taught not with explanation, but with repetition. Not all learning is taught. Some of it is caught, absorbed through rhythm, through background noise, through the slow gravity of what always appears. You didn't learn the meaning of a crown from history books. You learned it from logos, from the top of trophies, from the tips of castles in cartoons, from the top corners of screens where achievements spark and blink. Now you feel its weight in moments of accomplishment. Not because you sought royalty, but because the image found you. Again and again, until it embedded. And this is how belief forms, not in flashes, but in layers. Layer after layer of influence, suggestion, placement, until meaning is no longer questioned. It is just felt. You know what a check mark means. You know what a cross means. You know what a flag implies. You know what a lock icon promises. Not because you've considered these meanings, but because you've consumed them. Not all knowledge is active. Some simply accumulates, and you become fluent in it without ever realizing. Fluent in a symbolic language no one sat down and taught you. You know to sit facing forward. You know to raise your hand to speak. You know how to behave in rooms with certain lighting, certain ceiling heights, certain floor textures. Because architecture teaches, and light teaches, and texture teaches, and sound teaches, and when they all agree, you don't question. You just align. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. But adaptation becomes belief when it goes unnoticed, when you forget it was learned, and believe it was true. You weren't born understanding what it means to be on time, but the clock face drilled itself into your brain. 12 divisions, 2 hands, 1 expectation. The tick became law, and the law became instinct. Now, when you're late, your stomach clenches, not because you're in danger, but because your body has internalized failure. You weren't born into shame, but the signs were everywhere. The subtle ones, the glances, the praise for obedience, the quiet withdrawal of warmth when you were wrong. The system didn't punish, it shaped, and your mind took notes. It created shortcuts, associations. The sound of that tone means disapproval. The look on that face means withdrawal. The red pen means imperfection. The gold star means worth. You learned this without permission, without inquiry. You learned it because to survive was to adapt. And adaptation, repeated, becomes belief. You've learned the tone of authority, the posture of belonging, the body language of being safe in a space. You learned how to disappear in a crowd, how to speak just loud enough, how to agree quickly enough. You call it personality, but maybe it's pattern. Maybe your comfort is less about choice and more about alignment with unseen rules. Rules written not in law but in symbol. the logo on a shirt, the color of the wall, the echo of a chime in a hallway, all of it training, all of it subtle, all of it pre-verbal. Because words are not the mind's first language. The mind speaks in shape, in rhythm, in color. And it's been speaking longer than you've been listening. Think about your dreams, the repeated settings, the familiar objects, the way certain doors reappear even when the storyline changes. This isn't coincidence, it's symbolic residue, a feedback loop between what you've seen, what you've absorbed, and what your unconscious reshapes. You dream in metaphors you didn't choose. Your mind serves back to you a language you never formally agreed to learn. But it's yours now, and it's fluent. Your preferences were sculpted long before you thought they were personal. Why do you feel calm around certain fonts? Why does symmetry soothe you? Why does a particular brand's interface feel safe? Because the language of design doesn't explain. It conditions. It leads the body before the mind catches up. And when the body trusts the pattern, the mind surrenders to it. That's why you don't question green lights. You don't question confirmation sounds. You don't question when the arrow points next. You simply proceed. This is efficiency. This is civilization. This is the dream of systems. But systems forget to mention that their language shapes not just behavior, but belief. And when belief is shaped without awareness, it becomes invisible. You don't know why you feel what you feel. You just feel it, and you assume it's yours. But what if it isn't? What if it was installed? Subtly, silently, through repetition and rhythm and reinforcement. You weren't indoctrinated, you were immersed. The difference is tempo, not outcome. The result is the same, an internal world fluent in external design. So ask yourself, what symbols do I trust without thinking? What messages do I follow without knowing? What beliefs have I adopted without inspection? These questions are not attacks. They are invitations, invitations to notice. Because when you notice the shape of your thought, you begin to remember the architecture of influence. You begin to see the scaffolding behind the symbol. You begin to loosen the spell. This is not about blame, it's about awakening. It's about realizing that the mind isn't just a mirror, it's a sponge. It remembers what you never meant to learn, but it also unlearns. With intention, with slowness, with space. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to settle, as the day's noise recedes into rhythm, let yourself wonder, what did I learn before I could choose? What language moves through me without name? What beliefs were not born from me, but placed within me? And in that wondering, something softens, the loops loosen, and something older, something truer, begins to stir. Not the voice of training, not the echo of pattern, but the original awareness beneath it, still watching, still waiting, still yours. It begins small, a line curved, turning in on itself, unassuming. But you follow it. You always have. Your eyes trace the loop inward, around, again, deeper. There is something in the spiral that resists explanation. And yet, it feels familiar, not like a memory, more like a return. You've seen it before, not just once, not just in nature, everywhere, in the curve of a shell, in the center of a storm, in galaxies, in fingerprints, in staircases that never end. The spiral isn't a symbol you recognize, it's a shape that recognizes you, and it keeps returning. In dreams, in patterns, in moments of uncertainty, when you're trying to understand something, when you're grasping for control, the spiral appears. It whispers motion, it invites you inward. But the spiral is not a circle. That's what makes it dangerous. It deceives you with its smoothness. You think you're going around again, familiar territory. But you're not. You're deeper, or further out. But never back, because spirals don't return. They continue. They twist through dimensions, through memory, through desire. And they never quite resolve. That's the first illusion. That spiral's loop. They don't. They drift. They blur the line between progress and repetition, between knowing and forgetting, between path and trap. You walk a spiral staircase, thinking you're going somewhere, but the world turns with you, and soon you're dizzy, not from ascent but from orientation lost. This is how belief works, how trauma works, how longing works. They don't announce themselves in lines, they spiral. You revisit them. You think you've healed. You think you've understood. But it returns, again slightly shifted. Same symbol, new depth, same feeling, new edge, same thought, new cost. And the spiral smiles. Because it knew you'd be back. Spirals are ancient, carved into stone by those who had no language but understood recurrence. Etched onto bones, painted on caves, burned into ritual. The spiral was not decoration. It was a map, not of place, but of process. The process of becoming, of dying, of waking again. The spiral doesn't tell you what it means. It tells you that meaning is not still. Meaning moves, and you must move with it. But how often do we mistake spirals for failure? I'm back here again. I thought I was past this. But what if you aren't regressing? What if you're circling a truth too large to take in at once? What if each loop is a new vantage, a new layer? A spiral is not a setback, it is a return with expansion. And that's harder to measure, because it defies metrics. You can't map growth on a straight line when the soul moves in spirals. Healing is spiral. Grief is spiral. Time is spiral. We were taught to count in seconds, in steps, in sequences. But the body counts in cycles. The mind remembers in loops, and the spirit, if you believe in such a thing, spins like a galaxy. The spiral is the language of return without repetition, and it haunts us because we crave endings, closure, resolution. But the spiral doesn't close. It opens infinitely. Each time you reach a conclusion, a new loop begins. This is not inefficiency, it's complexity. It's the nature of insight. The truth never arrives as a point, it arrives as a path. And the path curves, so when you see the spiral on a book, a logo, a coin, a gate, your mind does not just see a design, it feels something deeper. A pull, a memory that isn't personal, but architectural. You are made of spirals. Your DNA winds like one. Your cochlea, deep in your ear, shaped like one. Your fingerprints, your whorls of hair, your intestines. You digest in spirals. You hear in spirals. You exist through spirals. So is it any wonder your mind trusts them? Even when it shouldn't. Because spirals also trap. not through force, but through seduction. The hypnotist spins the wheel, the cyclone forms the eye, the predator stalks in circles, the rabbit hole beckons, and you descend, not with resistance but with curiosity. The spiral is the promise that the next turn will make sense, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it never does. Maybe the spiral isn't a path toward knowledge, but a mirror for obsession. A shape that teaches you how to chase answers without ever catching them, how to move endlessly and call it purpose. This is how addiction forms, how thought spirals steal hours, how panic begins. One small thought, turning, then again, tighter, faster, until all sense of beginning or end vanishes. You think the answer lies at the center, but by then the center has collapsed, and still you spin. But the spiral is not your enemy. It is your shape. It only becomes harmful when you forget you're inside it, when you mistake motion for clarity, when you confuse complexity for failure. You have not failed, you have looped, and looping is how the deep truths arrive, not all at once, but in fragments, with echoes, with patterns that reappear in different disguises, the same fear in a new relationship, the same doubt in a different job, the same ache in another city. You aren't broken. You're spiraling, and you always have been. Because this isn't the first time you've seen this spiral. It was in your childhood, in your drawings, in the water that circled the drain, in the fairy tales where the woods had no end. It was in the phone cords you twisted while talking, in the hurricanes on the news, in the snail you watched cross the pavement, in the dreams where the staircase kept going. The spiral has followed you, not to trap, to teach, to remind you that understanding isn't instant, that depth comes through circling, that growth is uneven, that life isn't a line or a climb or a checklist. It is a spiral. So tonight, when your thoughts start circling, when an old memory returns with new weight, when you feel yourself walking familiar ground with a new ache, don't resist. Walk it again, but slower, wider. Ask what this version of the spiral is here to show you. And no, you are not lost. You are orbiting. And orbiting is still motion, and motion is still alive. And alive means you're still becoming. There was a time when every mark made was magic, when to draw a shape was to summon, when to speak a word was to bind, when meaning was a force, not a function. We've forgotten this. We've learned to see symbols as neutral, as harmless, as signs on a map, nothing more. But they are not neutral. They never were. A symbol is a seed, planted in thought, watered by repetition, grown into belief. It may look like a simple thing, a logo, a glyph, a sign on a wall, but it lives longer than you think. It works quietly. It moves in you long after you've stopped noticing. Because symbols don't ask for attention, they ask for space. And once they have it, they don't leave. They embed, they shape, they spell. Yes, spell. As in enchantment, as in casting, as in changing your behavior without ever touching your will. Because that's what a symbol does. It bypasses reason. It bypasses language. It whispers to something older, something under the mind. Symbols carry more than information. They carry intention. even if the intention has been forgotten, even if the one who made it is gone, even if the world has moved on. The spell remains, cast in geometry, bound in design, and we live surrounded by these dormant spells, still humming with inherited meaning. Take the cross, the star, the crescent. They are more than lines, more than symmetry. They are containers of faith, of memory, of blood. And yet they are everywhere. On jewelry, flags, windows, tattoos. They blend in, but they hum. The symbol doesn't lose its power just because you stopped believing in it. You lose power when you forget it had any. This is how a spell becomes most dangerous, when you no longer know it's a spell, when the sign becomes second nature, when the glyph becomes background, when the shape becomes expectation. Think of the dollar sign, a line, a curve, a concept. You don't need to believe in the economy to respond to it. You see it and your brain responds. Value, price, worth. It triggers behavior. You spend, you save, you hoard, you worry. A spell disguised as currency, cast with every paycheck, every receipt, every transaction. The symbol does not ask for your belief, it creates belief. This is how marketing works, how branding works, how flags work. They don't ask you to think. They ask you to recognize. And recognition is a kind of submission. You give them space in your mind, and they give you meaning in return. But meaning on whose terms? A corporate logo is not just identification. It is ideology wrapped in design. It says, this is safe, this is premium, this is for you. Even when it's not, even when it's poison, even when it's theft. The spell doesn't care about ethics, it cares about effect. And the most effective spell is the one you cast on yourself. Every time you call yourself lazy, broken, late, unworthy, you are drawing an invisible glyph in your mind. You are casting a belief, and belief repeated becomes a system of expectation, a structure of response, an identity. You say, that's just who I am, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just a symbol you absorbed too early and never questioned. Maybe it's a spell you were given instead of a name, a label that hardened into self-image. The child who was called difficult becomes the adult who calls themselves impossible. The teenager who was labeled dramatic becomes the grown-up who apologizes for feeling. The student who was told they were slow begins to move through the world with the spell of limitation wrapped around their voice. You did not write these spells, but they live in you, and they are written in symbols. Symbols of tone, of posture, of repetition. You saw it in the teacher's raised eyebrow, in the C that preceded your question, in the red mark at the top of the page. You saw it in your reflection. You heard it in the silence. And now you carry it, like an old sigil etched into your thinking. But spells can be rewritten. Symbols can be broken. The magic is not eternal. It's just familiar. And familiarity isn't truth. It's just repetition. So tonight, begin again. Walk through your thoughts with new eyes. Ask, what symbols shape me? What names have I accepted? What signs do I follow without remembering when I agreed to? And what would happen if I redrew them, if I erased the old glyph, if I stepped outside the spell? It won't happen all at once. Unspelling is a slow undoing, a peeling back of layers. But even that is a spell, a spell of awakening, of return, of remembering that you were not always what you were told, that you do not need to believe the glyphs others etched into your story, that you can choose new symbols, symbols of expansion, of softness, of freedom. So when you see the logo, the flag, the flashing icon, the old label, pause, don't react. Look, really look. See not just the shape, but the spell inside it. See what it's doing, not just what it says. And then ask, do I still want this spell? Because a symbol is just a spell you forgot was cast. And forgetting is the first step to obedience. But remembering is magic. It blinks, a tiny vertical line, barely there, waiting, but not passive. It's never been passive. It commands without raising its voice. The cursor, you call it a tool, but it's a throne, a position of control so embedded in the landscape of your screen, you forget it's directing you. It decides where the next thought appears, where attention lives, where action begins. And you follow, not because you're told to, but because you've always followed. It's always been there, at the start of every sentence, every search, every declaration, blinking, pulsing, summoning. The rhythm of its blink is not random. It is metronomic, hypnotic. It says, now. It says, right here. It says, this is the space where thought becomes real. You might believe you are deciding what to write, but the cursor decides where, and where shapes how. This is the secret hierarchy of the interface. Not the content, but the framing, not the meaning, but the permission. And the cursor is the gatekeeper. You don't question its location. You trust it. You wait for it to move. And when it moves, you follow. Even the delay before you type, when the cursor blinks alone on the screen, is a moment of instruction. A command disguised as neutrality. It holds space like a monarch, still, composed, demanding without expression. And we bow. Every field you click into is a room the cursor already rules. And when you begin to type, it recedes, sliding forward, leading the sentence like a quiet conductor. You think it's disappearing, but it's simply clearing space for the crown it wears. The crown is not gold or ornate. It is made of position, of context. It is made of the power to define where things begin, and the one who controls the beginning controls the direction. What if the cursor had an opinion? What if it had memory? Would it remember every hesitation, every deleted sentence, every false start? Would it remember what you wanted to say before you edited yourself, before you made it sound acceptable? Because the cursor doesn't just blink between words, it blinks between versions of you. The version that wants to scream, the version that wants to confess, the version that doesn't know what to say, but types anyway. You call it a text field, but it's more than a space. It's a mirror, and the cursor is the reflection that decides where to stand. It is the pointer of digital identity, the flicker that says, this is you now. But here's what we forget. The cursor is not born. It is placed by software, by systems, by defaults. Your message opens with the cursor in a certain place because someone decided it should. Your form field tells you where to begin, not just with information, but with self. Name, email, address. Tell us about yourself. Enter your reason here. Each prompt a box, each box a role, and the cursor appears inside that role, blinking, waiting for you to perform it. This is not freedom. This is formatting. And formatting is expectation dressed as design. You don't question the order of the boxes. You just fill them in. Like a ritual, like a sacrament, like a vow. Even the way you write, one line after another, left to right, top to bottom, is not universal. It is conditioned, trained, and the cursor enforces it. It does not tolerate chaos. Try typing out of order. Try placing your thoughts where the cursor is not. Try expressing without format. You can't. The system won't let you. Because the cursor does not follow you. You follow it. You track its blink like a metronome of legitimacy. Only where it lands are you allowed to speak. Only where it permits do your thoughts become visible. Even silence obeys the cursor. You stare at it, blinking alone on a blank page, and feel watched. By what? By expectation. By the pressure to produce, to articulate, to perform, to make sense, to be linear, to be clear, to be safe. That pressure lives inside the blink, the pause between each flash. You feel it, and you respond. Even when you have nothing to say, even when you're empty. Especially then, because the blinking cursor is a reminder. You are being invited to perform productivity. And if you don't, the page remains blank, and the blank page whispers failure. But is it failure, or is it resistance? To format, to expectation, to the myth that if you're not writing, you're wasting. The cursor wants you to continue, even when you shouldn't, even when silence would be more honest, even when nothing true fits the frame. This is how systems bend creativity. They replace spontaneity with formatting. They replace pause with pressure, and they call it usability. But it's obedience, smoothed into convenience, and the cursor is its crown, a tiny, flickering king. So what would happen if you stopped? If you placed the cursor where it wasn't meant to be? If you typed off screen? If you paused for longer than polite? If you left the page blank, not in defeat but in defiance? You are not your output. You are not your word count. You are not your alignment with the margins. You are more than the space the cursor permits. But it's hard to remember that, because the screen is patient, and the blink never stops. Until you close the tab, until you turn off the light, until you step away from the ritual of performance and remember, the blinking line is not your master, it is a tool, but it only becomes one again when you take back the throne and choose where your sentence begins, where your truth lands, where your voice dares to shape a page not by default, but by design, your design. It begins when the screen wakes, the light glows, the icons settle into place. Everything is where you left it, or so it seems. But this isn't your space. It's a stage, and everything you see is a costume, an illusion, precise in its simplicity, a myth dressed in usability. The interface. You've been trained to trust it, to swipe, to tap, to believe, to assume that when something slides into view, it's real, that when a button clicks, something happens. But beneath the smoothness, beneath the gentle curves, the drop shadows, the soft sounds, there is machinery, code, logic, layers, a labyrinth of processes too vast to hold in your mind at once. And so the myth is necessary. It tells you, this is simple, this is intuitive, this is yours, but it's not yours. You didn't build this interface. You didn't choose its terms. You were invited, then adapted. You don't think about how your finger becomes a proxy for desire. You just swipe. You don't question the grid that arranges your choices. You just scroll, because it feels natural. That's the magic of myth. It doesn't declare itself. It absorbs you. It makes the unnatural feel inevitable. You don't see 1,000 decisions behind the layout. You see clarity. You see comfort. You see your world reflected back to you, smoothed into symmetry. The interface is not your window to the system. It is the system, just softened, just translated, just designed to feel humane, to feel trustworthy. But the human is missing. There is no warmth behind the button, no hand behind the automation. Just scripts, just calculations, just myths written in pixels. You press send and feel like you've acted. You click agree and feel like you've chosen. But have you? Or have you performed a ritual of compliance dressed as interaction? The interface doesn't just show you what's available. It decides what's visible. It frames the narrative. It suggests the options. It omits alternatives. You trust it because it works. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. Because the smoother it feels, the less you question what's missing. You don't notice the extra taps it takes to unsubscribe. The confirmation layers that delay deletion. The way certain choices are framed in brighter colors, bigger buttons, friendlier language. The interface does not lie. It nudges. And nudging is design with an agenda. You are always being guided. Not by force, by suggestion. And suggestion, repeated enough, becomes belief. You believe the feed is endless. You believe the notification is urgent. You believe the number beside the heart means something real. But these are myths, crafted myths, tiny stories embedded in shape and motion, like ancient temples shaped to echo prayers. These interfaces are architectures of attention, built not to hold truth, but to hold you. The swipe, the shimmer, the loading circle, each one a charm, a talisman, a symbol with a script behind it. You touch the screen and expect response. You don't ask what's underneath. You don't ask who decided that sliding left should mean rejection. That red means warning. That blue means trust. You don't question the choreography. You just dance. But the myth goes deeper than motion. It lives in language. Friend, like, follower. Words that once described relationships now describe metrics, quantified affection, gamified connection. You believe you're communicating, but the interface is counting. Not your feelings, your engagement. The myth of presence, the myth of intimacy, the myth of here. But you're not here. You're in a simulation of here, a version so distilled it no longer reflects. It just reinforces. This is how myths survive, by making themselves invisible, by disguising themselves as normal, by becoming the air you move through. You don't see the myth. You feel it in the comfort of familiar gestures, in the satisfaction of visual response, in the illusion of control. But control in an interface is an illusion granted by its architect. You can click anything, as long as it's clickable. You can choose anything, as long as it's offered. You can speak within the character limit, within the format, within the bounds of what's been permitted by the layout. The interface is not a tool. It is a script, and you are the actor. You didn't write the play, but you know the role, because it's been rehearsed through every app, every screen, every notification you've absorbed. And slowly the script becomes your own. You forget where it came from. You think it was always this way. You think this is how people are. Short, fast, reactive, optimized. But maybe this is how people become when they live inside systems designed to shape them. The interface doesn't just adapt to human behavior. It trains it. It rewards certain actions, punishes others with friction, delay, obscurity. You don't think of this as manipulation. You think of it as good design. Because it works. It feels good. It feels seamless. But seamlessness is a story, a myth of effortlessness, and effortlessness conceals architecture. Every seamless experience is hiding someone else's control. But myths are not evil. They are tools, stories we use to make the world feel understandable. And sometimes they're necessary. Sometimes the myth keeps us from falling into the abyss. Sometimes the myth gives us something to hold. But myths must be seen to be survived. You don't have to reject the interface. You only have to remember it's not neutral, that each gesture is a choice someone else made and you've inherited, that each interaction is a belief you've practiced over and over until it became behavior. Tonight, when the screen dims, when your hand reaches for one more tap, one more scroll, one more confirmation, pause. Let the gesture hang. Don't complete it. Just observe. Observe the shape. Observe the loop. Observe the myth in motion. And ask, is this what I want? Or is this just the easiest shape to step into? The interface will wait. The myth will hold. But the moment you see it, truly see it, you are no longer inside it. You are beside it. And that shift, tiny as it is the beginning of freedom. It stands at the edge of the road, flat, silent, unmoving, a rectangle, a circle, a triangle. It says STOP. It says yield. It says merge. But what it means is please, please stop, please yield, please merge. Because a sign cannot make you do anything. It can only ask. And in this way, every road sign is a prayer to order, to cooperation, to attention, to shared understanding. You don't know the person in the car beside you, but you trust that they too will slow at the red, that they too will turn when the arrow blinks, that they too were taught to obey the symbol. And so you drive, not with certainty but with faith. This is not about traffic. This is about ritual. Because roads are not just concrete and paint. They are contracts, invisible agreements wrapped in geometry. Lines that guide, arrows that suggest, signs that plead, and you follow them, not because you fear punishment, but because you believe in the system they represent. Or at least, you need to. Otherwise, the roads fall into chaos. Otherwise, every intersection becomes a gamble. So we believe. We believe that a diamond shape means caution, that a green circle means permission, that a white sign edged in red means this matters. We believe it the way others believe in omens, in signs from gods, in the way the wind moves, in the flicker of a candle flame. We read these man-made glyphs with reverence, not for their beauty, but for their function. We imbue them with moral weight. You've felt it. The guilt of rolling through a stop sign, even when no one saw. The tension of speeding in a school zone, even when the school is closed. The fear of turning wrong into oncoming uncertainty. These are emotional reactions to symbols, because every road sign carries not just instruction, but expectation. It tells you, this is how the world should work, and in obeying it, you affirm that belief. You contribute to the shared dream. But what kind of dream is this? A world made of lines and boundaries, of regulated motion, of forward paths, of left turns that are harder than rights. A world where flow is sacred, where stasis is a problem, where every pause is temporary. Even the signs tell you so. No standing, keep moving, even stop is red, urgent, impermanent, the color of emergency, the color of not yet. Even standing still must feel like waiting, because motion is worshipped, and the signs are its scripture. Even their placement is sacred, uniform, repetitive, measured by distance, every 500 feet, every turn, every merge. There is rhythm, there is pattern, there is law. But law is never just regulation. It is also belief, and belief always hides behind language. The word yield doesn't just instruct, it humbles. It asks you to slow for another, to surrender priority, to make space. It is one of the few signs that suggests generosity. Most others imply control. Do not enter. One way, wrong way, judgments in all caps, not suggestions, declarations. But even those are prayers. Prayers for obedience, for alignment, for a world where movement can be predicted and thus trusted. We want this. We crave it. Because to move through space with others, to share motion, is terrifying. And these signs give us a shared script, a way to be near without colliding, to be alone without being unsafe. But they also tell a deeper story about how we see space, about who gets to go first, about what paths are paved and which are not. The sign doesn't just say, speed limit 65. It says, here, we value efficiency over patience. It doesn't just say, no pedestrians. It says, this place is for machines, not bodies. Road signs may seem neutral, but they aren't. They reflect values. They shape behavior. They encode choices made long ago by people you'll never meet. People who decided that speed mattered more than silence. That signage mattered more than scenery. That symbols mattered more than stories. Because these signs don't tell you where you are, only how to move. They are not narrative. They are algorithm. And you, the driver, the walker, the rider, you are the data point being routed. So where is the prayer? It's in the silence between symbols. It's in the way we trust that the bridge is strong, that the lane will continue, that the turn will be allowed, that others will stop, that the paint will mean the same thing to everyone. It is not a small thing. This is faith, exercised 100 times a day in micro-movements, signaled, surrendered, repeated, a sacred choreography performed by strangers. And yet, sometimes the signs lie. Sometimes they confuse. Sometimes they're missing altogether. And when they are, you feel lost. not just directionally, but philosophically. You question the whole map, because once a symbol breaks trust, all symbols become suspect, and you realize the world is not ordered. We only perform order. Through signs, through lines, through expectations, we keep chaos at bay with icons on poles. But the chaos never left. It just obeys, for now. And still we pray. We pass the sign that says dead end and trust that it means finality. We pass the sign that says detour and trust that someone has thought ahead. We pass the sign that says stop and trust that everyone else sees it too, even though sometimes they don't, and accidents happen, and prayers go unanswered, and silence rings louder than sirens. And still, we post new signs, we repaint the line, we reinstall the mirror, we resume the dance, because the alternative is unthinkable. A world without agreement, without pattern, without trust, without signs, so we keep writing them. Not just with paint, but with belief. Every road sign is a prayer that says, may we move together, may we see each other, may we make it home. And when the sun sets, and the signs glow green and red in the mist of the highway, and the night stretches long between towns, look at them. Let them remind you of the faith that binds us all in motion. And know, you are not alone, not while the symbols still shine. It moves before you do, before your eyes shift, before your focus sharpens, before you decide what matters. An invisible force, a finger you never see but always feel, pointing, pulling, guiding your gaze through rooms, through pages, through the blur of modern life. You think you're choosing, but something is choosing for you. Not with words, not with noise, with placement, with contrast, with timing. This is not control in the traditional sense. It is softer. A choreography of glances, a design of desire. Your eyes, like compass needles, turn toward the same spots again and again. The top right corner of the screen, the moving number, the blinking icon, the bold font, the flash of red. It is no accident. It never was. Attention has become architecture, built not to reflect curiosity, but to predict it, not to reveal the world, but to shape what part of the world becomes visible. This is the invisible finger. You followed it through your entire life, through signs, through sounds, through sequences. From childhood, your attention has been trained, nudged, shaped, sculpted, until your gaze became a predictable pattern. They called it education. They called it entertainment. They called it news. But really it was a lesson in direction. Not what to think, but where to look. And wherever you look, something waits. An address, an alert, a symbol, a suggestion. Not a request for belief, just a cue for attention. And attention is the first form of obedience, because whatever you notice, you begin to belong to. You carry it with you. You think about it later. You compare yourself to it. You build opinions around it. You organize your reality around the things you looked at. Long enough, loud enough, often enough. And this is not your failure. This is design. This is economy. Because attention is currency now. Not just a resource, a market. Your focus is bought and sold in fractions of seconds. Companies don't want your loyalty. They want your gaze, your cursor, your scroll, your pause. Every moment you hesitate is a data point. Every moment you linger is a yes, even if your mind says no. The body has already agreed, because the invisible finger doesn't ask for consent. It skips the asking. It simply moves and your eyes follow. Sometimes it's obvious, the pop-up, the push notification, the banner ad. But sometimes it's subtler, a suggestive shape, a rhythm of content, a sequence designed to loop, so that when you finish, you begin again without knowing. This is not manipulation in the old sense. It is mapping. Your behavior is a landscape now, and the finger knows every path, not by mind reading, by pattern recognition. You've trained it, and it has trained you. It knows when you're most vulnerable, when you're most awake, when you're bored, lonely, curious. Your feed adjusts accordingly. Your apps shimmer at the right hour. Your thoughts are redirected before they even arrive. So when you notice that you're noticing, what do you do? Do you blink? Do you pause? Do you pull away? Or does your gaze return again despite yourself? Because that's the trick. The finger is not a dictator. It is a seducer. It whispers, "Look here." Just for a moment, it's not a big deal. And so you look, and the looking becomes a habit, and the habit becomes identity. You start to believe, this is what I care about. But what if it isn't? What if you only care because you kept looking? And you only kept looking because the invisible finger wouldn't leave you alone. The line between interest and exposure has blurred. You're told what you love is yours. But love doesn't always begin in the heart. Sometimes it begins in repetition. And repetition is what the finger knows best. Because attention once caught is easier to catch again, and again, and again, until you no longer remember what your attention felt like before it was claimed. You begin to lose the ability to look without being led, to wonder without being answered, to seek without being served. And still the finger moves. It lives in layout, in composition, in notification badges, in the sound your phone makes when you're not touching it, in the way the headline is phrased as a question, in the way the reply option is highlighted just enough. These are not glitches. They are intentions, placed with care. And we call this care user experience. But who exactly is the user? And whose experience are we optimizing? Because when every interface becomes a mirror for predicted behavior, there is no room left for the unexpected, for the unchosen, for the wildness of attention. That old kind of attention, the kind that stares at clouds for hours, that listens to a clock tick just to feel time, that follows ants on the pavement just to understand movement, that opens a book with no purpose, that looks at someone's face not to judge, but to see. That attention is quiet now, buried beneath the noise, because it cannot compete with the optimized choreography. It cannot perform urgency. It cannot sell itself in a single scroll. It is the attention that comes slowly, the kind that arrives rather than being summoned. And it's still in you. You haven't lost it. It's just waiting. Waiting for the moment you look back at the invisible finger, at the mechanism of attraction, at the trail of distractions, and say, I see you, not with anger, not with fear, just recognition. And with that recognition, You begin to reclaim your gaze, not by closing your eyes, but by choosing what to open them toward. You can still follow curiosity, still follow beauty, still follow truth, but let it be on your own terms. Let the gaze be yours again. Let your attention be an offering, not a reaction. Because to give attention is to give life, to declare, this matters, this exists, this is real to me, and nothing, not even the most elegant design, should decide that for you. So tonight, as the screens glow soft, as the feeds fall quiet, and the invisible finger tries once more to gesture you towards something else, pause, and in the pause, reclaim your direction. Look at something that cannot monetize you, something that cannot capture you, something that doesn't need your gaze to survive. And in that looking, a freedom returns. You don't see it, but it holds everything, like scaffolding behind your thoughts, like invisible lines under paper, like a net beneath the performance of your mind. The grid. It's not loud, it's not bright, it doesn't speak, but it organizes. It arranges your world before you ever arrive in it, before you have a chance to ask if that arrangement is necessary or even true. It doesn't need your belief, only your repetition, because once the grid is learned, you stop noticing. And once you stop noticing, it becomes real, not because it is, but because it's there. The grid beneath your thinking is ancient, but also artificial, a cultural blueprint passed from one system to the next, from blackboards to calendars, from notebooks to spreadsheets, from tiled floors to urban planning, from time zones to table settings, from cognitive maps to interface design. Everything measured, everything gridded, everything squared away, even your creativity, even your grief, even your most sacred moments happen on timelines, on platforms, on templates. You were taught early to color inside the lines, to stay between margins, to write left to right, top to bottom, to place your name in the top right corner, to divide your day into hours, your thoughts into bullet points, your worth into metrics. You don't question the format. The format questions you. Have you filled the box? Did you meet the line? Are you aligned? Because the grid rewards alignment. It praises neatness. It celebrates fit. And in doing so, it quietly punishes whatever doesn't conform, whatever spills, whatever bends, whatever resists. And so you adapt. Your handwriting changes to match the ruled page. Your language shortens to fit the form field. Your behavior bends to fit the schedule. You say you're organized. You say you're efficient. But maybe you're just gridded. And what is the cost? The cost of always fitting, of always lining up. You lose the lopsided thoughts, the curved expressions, the truths that don't arrive on schedule. You lose the questions that don't fit into bullets. You lose the answers that don't resolve. You lose the quiet that doesn't perform. Because the grid isn't just spatial, it's psychological. It teaches you to prefer order over ambiguity, to value symmetry over sincerity, to mistake clarity for truth, to confuse structure with meaning. But the soul doesn't think in rectangles, it thinks in spirals, in waves, in pulses, in rhythms that contradict, in images that blur, in feelings that flood across boundaries. But you've been taught to trim them down, to reduce the essay to a summary, the dream to a sentence, the grief to a checkbox marked, I'm doing okay. The grid wants resolution. It wants to fit you somewhere. So you shrink, you crop, you flatten. You perform the version of yourself that fits inside the cells, and you forget there was ever a version that didn't. The grid is not evil. It's a tool. But a tool that pretends to be a truth can become a trap. It begins to tell you not just how to organize your world, but what your world is. It tells you that time must be linear, that space must be squared, that behavior must be predictable, that thought must be structured, and you, needing to survive, agree, until the box becomes the belief, until the form becomes the faith, until the schedule becomes your skeleton. Even your emotions get gridded. You're allowed sadness on certain days, anger in certain contexts, joy when it can be shared publicly and liked. Even your dreams obey formatting now. You try to describe them in words that make sense. You try to make them linear. You try to capture them in journals that box the margins. But the dreams don't care. They leak, they resist, they spill into the corners. And that's where the real thoughts live. Outside the grid, you've seen it happen. The best ideas come in the shower, not in the meeting. The truth slips out in the silence between questions, not in the answer itself. Love appears off schedule. Insight arrives when you stop trying. And grief, that refuses to obey any structure at all, because the deep parts of being do not emerge on demand. They bloom when the structure softens, when the mind forgets the page it's supposed to be writing on, and remembers it is wild. The grid fears the wild, because the wild can't be predicted, can't be measured, can't be monetized. But you need it. You need the mess. You need the space without lines. You need the corner of the canvas where the paint runs off. You need the paragraph that doesn't resolve, the sentence that meanders, the moment that isn't optimized for impact. Because that's where you are, not the gridded version, the real one. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to loosen, as the templates fade, and the pressure to align dissolves, ask yourself, what thoughts am I not allowed to think here? What feelings don't fit this format? What parts of me live outside the lines? And in asking, a crack appears, not in you, in the grid, a single quiet rupture in the frame, enough for something soft to emerge. Not structured, not polished, not square, but real, and alive and free. But the grid is persistent. It doesn't vanish just because you notice it. It lingers beneath every spreadsheet you open, every day planner you check, every box you tick to say, I have done enough today. It lingers in the architecture of your inbox, the bullet points in your resume, the gallery view of your memories. Even the way you speak has been subtly shaped. You pause between thoughts, not when your soul exhales, but when the cadence fits the format. You write your life in numbered lists, not because life happens in steps, but because it's easier to explain that way. The grid asks for legibility, but what if you were never meant to be legible? What if you are not a system to be navigated, but a forest to be wandered, a coastline to be circled, a weather system to be felt? The grid will always try to pin you, to capture you in tidy boxes of identity, to measure your effort in completed tasks, to flatten your depth into readable summaries. But you are not here to fit. You are here to remember. That before there was a grid, there was breath, there was rhythm, there was pulse, there was a sky without edges and a thought without corners. You are not a cell in a table. You are not a row in a system. You are not an entry in a feed. You are the white space between the lines. You are what leaks when the grid forgets to close itself. You are what begins when the structure ends. You walk on it every day, never looking down with reverence, never bowing to it as you pass. But it's there, beneath your steps, beneath your wheels, beneath your hurried departures and late-night returns. Pavement. It is not passive. It is not neutral. It is not just ground. It is instruction, etched in lines, in symbols, in color and contrast. And all of it speaks. The arrow that tells you to move forward. The white man blinking at the crosswalk. The yellow lines dividing the lanes. The stenciled silhouettes of bicycles, of children, of feet. You don't question these symbols. You adjust to them. Your body reacts before your thoughts do. Because you were trained by texture, raised in asphalt logic, disciplined by paint. Even the way you walk is shaped by what's beneath you. The smooth of the sidewalk versus the gravel of the shoulder. The cold echo of concrete versus the hot crumble of old road. The lines say, walk here. The borders say, not there. The arrows say, go now. The signs say you belong, but only in this direction. You move in obedience to geometry, but you call it instinct. You don't ask who drew these lines, or when, or why they remain. You just walk, because meaning has already been etched into parking spots, into bus lanes, into no standing any time, into school zone 15 mph, even into the curb's color-coded language. You've learned that red means no, that green means permission, that yellow means wait, but only briefly. These aren't opinions. They're systems, but they feel like truth. And that's the danger. When design becomes invisible, it becomes doctrine, and doctrine, when unexamined, becomes destiny. Pavement doesn't just support movement, it prescribes it. A crosswalk is not just a space to walk, it is a corridor of compliance. If you step outside it, you're not just jaywalking, you're breaking the choreography, because the street is a stage, a ritual, a set of shared assumptions etched into ground. You agree to them, not once, but continually, with every step that follows the painted path. Even the cracks have meaning. They suggest age, fracture, decay. They are whispers that the order is old, that the instruction is fraying. But still it holds. Still, the paint commands. Still, you follow. Because even broken systems can feel safer than unknown ones. And the pavement, though cracked, still speaks. Look closer. You'll see layers. Old lines buried beneath new ones. Bike lanes painted over former parking spots. Crosswalks shifted, expanded, removed, like scars of shifting values. The city rewriting its priorities in chalk and tar. But always in straight lines, always in measured widths. You never see a spiral in the street. You never see a question mark, only commands, only direction. Even when the road winds, the markings insist, this is the way. Even when you're lost, the pavement says, you are within a system. You are on a surface of known meaning. But not all meaning is welcome. Some markings shout ownership, territory, policing. surveillance zones disguised as safety. Other markings are spectral, faint outlines of bodies, memorials written in chalk, names stenciled into concrete, not instruction, remembrance, rebellion, grief. These markings don't guide, they interrupt. They call out the lie of neutrality. They say, this street is not equal to all. This pavement remembers violence. This surface is not just infrastructure, it is inheritance. Pavement is history paved over, old bricks beneath new asphalt, colonial routes beneath GPS data, marches beneath Uber routes, pain beneath convenience. And yet, when you step out your door, you forget. You follow the symbols because they keep you alive, because they promise orientation, because they promise you'll get somewhere. But where? To another curb, another intersection, another node in the network of movement. Does the pavement lead, or does it loop? You walk in straight lines because they're the only options. But the soul is not straight. Desire is not linear. Wonder wanders. But the street demands a path, and the paint punishes deviation. Try walking the city without touching a single line. Try avoiding every arrow, every crosswalk, every dictated movement. You'll see how difficult it is to move freely in a world designed for obedience. But the world beneath the world remembers. It remembers before the grid, before the cars, before the paint. It remembers footsteps that were not bordered, paths that curved with the land, not against it. The earth did not ask to be told where to walk, and neither did you. You simply inherited the etching. So what now? You can't unpave the world. You can't erase every line, but you can see them. And in seeing, something loosens. You begin to ask, what would it mean to wander here, to pause here, to cross where there is no crossing, not to break the law, but to break the spell of invisible agreement, of etched meaning mistaken for ultimate truth. Because not all lines are real. Some are suggestions with excellent posture. Some are fears drawn in white paint. Some are just echoes of old ideas we never questioned. So, next time you walk, look down, trace the symbols. Read the street like a story, not a schedule. Ask who wrote it. Ask what it assumes. Ask what it excludes, and then step just outside the line, not far, just enough to remember. The ground beneath the grid is older than its meaning, and your body, your moving, living, dreaming body, was never meant to be governed by paint. Not all commands are spoken, not all rules are written. Some arrive in glances, some arrive in tone, some arrive in silence, repeated just enough to become structure. These are the instructions you didn't know you followed. You didn't hear them. You felt them, absorbed them in passing, like static through skin. They never said, do this. They said nothing at all. And yet, you did. You smiled when you didn't feel like it. You nodded when you didn't agree. You laughed slightly later than the joke required. You adjusted your body in a chair not for comfort, but for acceptance. These weren't choices. They were responses, learned, not taught, conditioned by spaces where compliance earned warmth and deviation brought distance. This is how instruction hides, in reward, in pattern, in the path of least resistance. It's not the command that teaches you, it's the consequence. Every good job became a boundary. Every "that's not how we do things" became a wall. You began to notice eye contact means respect, silence means complicity, hurry means value, neatness means intelligence, doubt means danger. You weren't told this, you inferred it. And inference is one of the most powerful forms of instruction. It shapes your understanding of safety. It tells you who gets heard. It teaches you how to enter a room, how to tell a story, how to make others comfortable before yourself. Even now, you apologize before you speak truth. Even now, you soften declarations into questions. Even now, you wait for the right moment to say what you already know. That waiting, that hesitation, that's not you. That's a learned response to unspoken rules. You've followed them so long they no longer feel external. They feel like you. But they aren't. They're scripting, invisible and inherited. They come from classrooms where sitting still was considered virtue, from families where silence meant survival, from religions where obedience was holy, from algorithms that reward the palatable, from interfaces that correct your grammar while ignoring your meaning. These instructions are efficient. They make you legible. They make you manageable. They make you hireable, followable, promotable, polite. But they also shrink you, round your edges, blur your intensity, flatten your contradictions. You begin to wonder, is this me? Or is this just the version of me that draws the least friction? You followed instructions without paper, without ink, without confirmation that they were ever meant for you. You inherited them the way you inherit myths, through repetition. And myths, when believed long enough, become muscle memory. You perform correctness in spaces that never told you you were wrong. But your nervous system knew, your posture knew, your breath knew. There are rooms where you walk slower, where you speak softer, where you smile more than is natural. These are spaces shaped by invisible rules, and you follow them to survive. But survival is not the same as truth. The problem with unspoken instructions is they never expire. They echo through decades. They shape your inner voice. You begin to instruct yourself. You say, don't take up too much space. Don't ask for too much. Don't feel that loudly. Don't rest. You repeat these scripts like prayers. And prayers, too, are instructions. Soft commands to maintain belief, to delay collapse, to be grateful for the shape you've been allowed to inhabit. But what if that shape doesn't fit? What if the instruction is outdated? What if it was never yours to begin with? Unlearning begins with noticing the moments you edit yourself, noticing the pause before the truth, noticing the shame that arrives without invitation. These moments are flashlights. They show you the code, the embedded logic, the instruction set written in second-hand language. Don't be difficult. Be nice. Be realistic. Smile. Fit. Each phrase a lock on the door of your becoming. And yet you hold the key, because what was learned can be unlearned. Not easily, not cleanly, but slowly, like mist clearing, like color returning to something long faded. You start by breaking the smallest rules, speaking a little too plainly, asking for something before apologizing for it, resting when the to-do list is unfinished, letting your silence stretch past the edge of comfort. The system will resist. You'll feel it. The glitch, the hesitation, the voice inside saying, "This isn't how it's done." But that voice isn't truth. It's memory of compliance, of choreography, of rituals you didn't choose but performed beautifully. And now you're learning a new dance, one with pauses, one with steps that change, one with room for improvisation. The instructions you didn't know you followed don't vanish all at once. They resist, they cling, they echo, but with each act of refusal they soften, and something else takes shape in their place. Not rules, not rebellion, just room. Room to move differently, room to feel before filtering, room to be contradictory, to be wild, to be unformatted, to be honest. So tonight listen, not for the instruction, for the silence beneath it, the part of you that never agreed, that never bowed, that never believed the smile was required. It's still there, untamed, unimpressed by structure, unwilling to follow orders it never heard spoken, and if you're quiet enough, you'll feel it stir. The moment before obedience, the breath before performance, the truth raw and waiting, in the space between instructions. It's just a picture, a small image, a shape on a screen. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak, but you hear it. You've always heard it. The soft sound of association, the whisper of purpose, the faint echo of instruction. Because an icon doesn't need a voice to speak. It already knows how to speak through you. When you see the envelope, you think mail. Not paper, not pen, not the weight of a letter carried across distance, but a tap, a reply, a task to be cleared. When you see the floppy disk, you think save. Not because you've ever used one, but because someone taught the symbol to remember for you. And now you remember it, even when it's no longer true. Even when the object has died, the icon lives. This is the power of the pictograph. It outlives its context. It survives by shifting meaning, by anchoring to function, by refusing to vanish. And it speaks. Not in sentences, but in expectations. You don't read an icon, you respond to it. The play triangle invites your attention. The magnifying glass says search. The trash can says end, and you follow, because the image has spoken before you've had time to think. Icons are shortcuts for the mind, a bypass, a bridge from perception to action. They reduce complexity, and in that reduction they gain power, because the simpler a message, the easier it is to obey. You don't negotiate with an icon. You comply. And this isn't passive, it's performance. You perform fluency in symbolic language every day. You scroll, tap, click, drag. You identify what's interactive, what's dangerous, what's locked, what's urgent, without ever reading a word. You just know, because the voice of the icon is familiar. But who taught it to speak? Designers, developers, culture. The voice of the icon is a composite voice, a chorus of associations, repetitions, reinforcements. Icons are built by usage, refined by response, sharpened by habit. And what begins as innovation hardens into grammar, a visual syntax. You don't challenge the meaning, you expect it. But meaning evolves, and icons don't always keep up. They become ghosts. The telephone symbol still shows a handset few people have held. The camera symbol still evokes an aperture that no longer exists. But you don't notice. You hear the voice anyway. Because icons are not objects, they are ideas, ideas fossilized into shape. And shape, once repeated, becomes belief. A circle with a line through it is off. A lock is safety. A globe is internet. These are not truths. They are rituals. You perform them. And in performing, you reinforce. Every click is agreement. Every tap is assent. You're told this is intuitive, but intuition is learned, conditioned, encouraged, and icons are the tools of that conditioning. They speak with clarity. They erase doubt, but they also erase ambiguity. And sometimes ambiguity is where truth lives. Icons don't do nuance. They flatten. They reduce. They suggest this is the whole story. But no story fits in a square. No emotion resolves in a bell icon. No experience is fully captured in a heart. You press like and call it feeling. But it isn't. It's echo. An icon's voice isn't just functional. It's emotional. You feel something when you see the red dot. You feel urgency when the badge appears. You feel completeness when the check mark lands. These aren't accidents. They are engineered responses. The voice of the icon is scripted, tuned like a note to trigger your response. Even the silence of the icon is calibrated, a grayed-out button, an unlit symbol, a symbol that once spoke but now waits for your permission. You call this feedback. But maybe it's control. You learn to look for the glow, to seek the highlight, to follow the path carved by familiar shapes. And you wonder why you feel disoriented in unfamiliar systems. Because the icons aren't there. Because their voices are missing, and without them, you're unsure where to go. Who you are, what this space means. The voice of the icon has become your inner narrator. It speaks before you do. It names the action. It defines the possible. You've internalized the vocabulary of systems, of platforms, of structures built to guide, but also to predict. The icon speaks, and you respond. Not with language, with behavior. But what happens when an icon lies? When the download button installs malware? When the green check mark hides corruption? When the heart counts hate? When the image no longer matches the intention? We call this dark patterns, manipulative design, deception through symbols. But the harm is deeper. It's not just misdirection, it's betrayal. Because the voice of the icon was supposed to be honest, it was supposed to guide. And now you no longer trust it, but you still follow. Because there is no alternative. The system is built on iconography, and you are fluent in it. So how do you listen differently? How do you tell the difference between a signal and a spell? Start here. Pause before you click. Ask what the icon means, not what it says. Ask what it assumes. Ask what it hides. Ask what it wants from you. Because icons are not just tools. They are agreements, and every agreement can be questioned. The voice in the icon does not disappear when ignored, but it quiets, and in the quiet you begin to hear your own voice, the one beneath the interface, the one that isn't shaped like a bell or a heart or a square with rounded corners, the one that doesn't speak in commands, the one that wonders, that asks, that listens. So tonight, when the screen glows with its soft, suggestive language, pause, See the shapes, see the story they want you to believe. And then, for a moment, don't believe it. Just watch and listen and remember, the icon speaks, but so do you. You enter a room you've never seen, and yet something stirs. Not recognition, not quite. Something softer, slower, familiarity without memory. You know this hallway. You know this smell. You know the way the light lands across the tiles. You've never been here before. But your body disagrees, because the symbols say otherwise. It starts with the layout. A sign pointing left, a desk facing forward, a couch that invites waiting, a screen looping silent images. The geometry speaks first. You've stood in this configuration before. Somewhere else, somewhere forgettable, somewhere designed to feel exactly like this. Because symbols don't just repeat, they recur. And recurrence is how we simulate truth. You don't remember this exit sign, but you remember all the others. Your mind fills the gaps. It smooths the unfamiliar with echoes, and the symbols lead. A door labeled "Authorized Only," an arrow guiding your next move, an icon on the elevator button. These aren't instructions. They're memories pretending to be instructions. The feeling of "I've been here before" isn't always about place. Sometimes it's about design. Design that imitates itself. Design that duplicates experience until you believe it's yours. This is how memory fuses with repetition. This is how déjà vu is built. You are told you've arrived somewhere new, but the architecture says, "We've met." The lighting says, "We've done this." The font on the wall whispers, "Don't you remember?" You do, but you don't know what you're remembering. Because this isn't about a specific location. It's about structure. Every school looks like a hospital. Every waiting room like a checkpoint. Every hotel hallway like every other. The fire escape maps, the chairs bolted to the floor, the buzzer at the entrance, the painted lines on the parking lot, all of it rehearsed so many times that novelty has been paved over by expectation. And expectation is the most convincing kind of memory. You don't see what's there. You see what should be there. And when it is, when the sign is in the right place, the beep sounds at the right time, you trust it. Not because it earns your trust, but because it matches. Match enough symbols and you believe the space. You believe you belong, or you believe you're wrong. Because the inverse is also true. When symbols mismatch, you feel the dissonance. A door that doesn't push. A hallway with no signage, an interface with no back button. Your body tenses, your trust falters. You think something's off, but it's not the space, it's the absence of memory, the inability to overlay meaning, because meaning is how we find safety. And symbols are how meaning wears clothes, so we drape every space in them, even ones that don't need them. A bathroom with gendered symbols, a door marked private, a wall with a map for your convenience. But whose convenience is that, really? What is the cost of designing familiarity? You lose wonder, you lose presence. You walk into a place and stop seeing it. You see only what it reminds you of, only what it represents. The airport becomes procedure. The church becomes script. The museum becomes navigation. Everywhere the same signs, the same sounds, the same hand sanitizers, the same fire alarms, the same shapes on glass doors. You stop entering spaces. You start resuming them. This is how the world flattens, not through sameness of place, through sameness of symbol. But some places resist. They throw off the familiarity. A room with no labels, a street with no lines, a temple with no clocks. And suddenly you remember what it feels like to not know where you are. It feels like awe. It feels like alertness. It feels like waking up. The symbols are quiet here, or missing, and without them, the space speaks in a different voice, one not designed to be understood, only experienced. But these spaces are rare. Most are overcoded, oversigned, overnamed. So much so that you begin to feel like a tourist in your own life, moving from one known symbol to the next, searching not for meaning but for match. And this matching creates a strange kind of nostalgia, not for the past, for the known. You crave spaces that remind you of something, even if you never lived it. The old diner that feels like childhood, the vintage logo that feels authentic, the analog interface that feels trustworthy. You're not longing for history. You're longing for memory that already agrees with you, memory that's been pre-encoded in the design. This is nostalgia by algorithm, by aesthetics, by icons that reuse the past to soothe the present. And it works, until it doesn't. Until you find yourself walking through yet another identical hallway, hearing the same soft music, pressing the same sanitized buttons and wondering, have I been here before? Or have I just stopped arriving? Because symbols don't just reflect familiarity. They replace it. They insert themselves where experience should be. You don't discover. You confirm. You don't question. You recognize. And the loop continues. The same signs, the same forms, the same rituals, different building, same memory. But there's something under it, something stirring in the moment you pause. When you notice the mismatch, when you realize that you're not remembering this, you're remembering other things that looked like this, and suddenly the symbol thins, the layer peels, and the room is new again. You don't know what the door leads to. You don't know what the sign actually means. You don't know what the hallway holds. And now, finally, you've arrived, not to a place, to presence. Because symbols can guide, but they can also distract. And when you're distracted by familiarity, you stop being with the world. You're just matching ghosts. But you're not a ghost. You're here. You're breathing. You're looking. So tonight, as you enter a space, physical or digital, pause. Look for the symbol that says you've been here before, and question it. Ask if this place is truly familiar, or just pre-interpreted. And if you can, peel the symbol off, even for a moment, and see what the room says when it speaks for itself. Not as a memory, but as a mystery. Shapes have always told us what to feel. Long before words arrived with their agendas, shapes were enough. A triangle warned, a square secured, a circle welcomed, or trapped. You think geometry is neutral, that it just exists. But that's a myth. Geometry is never just form. It is intention, and intention repeated becomes control. You've always felt it. The triangle commands attention. It points, it cuts, it directs. Its angles say, decide. It's in the yield sign, the warning icon, the pyramid, the play button. Even the Illuminati knows the power of the point. It tells the eye where to go. But more than that, it tells the body how to behave. Then there's the square, the stable one, the structure, the containment field. Rooms are square, screens are square, pages, buildings, boxes, cubicles. The square does not ask. It frames. It says, this is the limit of what you need to know. It says, organize your life here. The square rewards order and punishes expansion. We are taught to live inside squares. Our homes, our desks, our minds. We internalize it so deeply, we begin to square our own lives, block by block, line by line. Efficiency becomes alignment, and alignment becomes morality. Be neat, be measured, be productive. Even our emotions must be formatted now. Too much grief, out of bounds. Too much joy, unprofessional. Keep it inside the square. But the circle, that's trickier. The circle promises wholeness, completion, but it can also become enclosure. There's no entry point in a circle, no exit, just the endless loop. It feels like unity, but often means containment. You've seen it in wedding rings, in security cameras, in traffic roundabouts, in the clock, always turning, always closing in. You look at the triangle and your pulse rises. You look at the square and you straighten. You look at the circle and you soften, or forget how to leave. These aren't preferences, they're responses, coded through culture, reinforced through repetition. Design is not innocent. The placement of shapes in your environment is a subtle architecture of power. Every sign, every form, every screen layout is a geometry lesson in compliance. Think of the city, the grid of streets, the right angles of sidewalks, the standardized signage. You walk straight because the world is built that way, not because your body prefers it, but because it's easier to manage movement in lines. Control loves the predictable, and geometry is a tool for prediction. A triangle points to decision, a square limits it, a circle defers it. You move inside these choices like a ritual, not questioning the shapes because they don't ask to be questioned. They simply are, and yet they teach. You go to a meeting in a room arranged in rows. The speaker is in front, elevated, framed by rectangles, screen, window, PowerPoint. The triangle of the stage aims down at you. You are placed inside the square of the chair, inside the box of the agenda. You are told this is efficiency, but it's choreography of bodies, of thought, of deference. The triangle leads, the square contains. You follow. Even your apps obey these rules, icons in perfect grids, buttons shaped by usability heuristics, call to action shapes tuned to draw your eye, not because of color, but because of form. Rounded corners say, touch me. Sharp edges say danger. Your hand responds before your thought does. Even the illusion of freedom in interfaces is shaped geometrically. Think of infinite scroll, a vertical line, a tunnel with no walls. You think you're free to go as far as you want, but the line is endless because it's linear. And linearity implies destination, but there is none. Just forward, always forward. This, too, is geometry, the promise of progress encoded in a direction. But progress toward what? toward the next content block, the next row, the next slice of monetized attention. The shape leads you, and because it feels smooth, you forget you're being led. This is the geometry of control, not through force, through flow. True control doesn't restrict motion. It guides it invisibly, like a funnel, like a maze, like a path that always returns to the beginning while pretending to go somewhere else. Even art uses this. Composition is a geometry. The golden ratio, the rule of thirds, the triangle of the gaze. You think you're seeing what you choose to see, but your eye is being steered by centuries of formalism, by design choices inherited from empires and cathedrals. And what about maps? Nothing declares control more than a map, the borders, the gridded streets, the scaled representation. But the earth is not flat. The land is not linear. The territory is not the territory. Yet we draw it square and call it understanding. We draw it straight and call it law. We assign names and call it history. But it's just lines, it's just shapes, and the more you believe the shapes, the less you see the land. The geometry becomes gospel. But what if it isn't sacred? What if the triangle is just urgency stylized? What if the square is just fear of collapse? What if the circle is just the comfort of never choosing? What would happen if you rearranged the shapes? If the square room became a circle? If the triangle pointed downward? If the linear schedule bent into a spiral? Would your thoughts change? Would your speech bend? Would your body finally exhale? Control isn't always about who gives orders. Sometimes it's about who draws the lines. And sometimes it's about who accepts them. You didn't choose this geometry, but it has shaped you. It shaped how you move, how you feel, how you navigate power. But you can unshape. You can redraw. Start small. Notice the forms. Ask why the room is shaped this way. Ask why the path leads there. Ask why the triangle always points. Then, if you can, turn it. Flip the direction. Step off the line. Stand where the square ends. And listen. Listen for the first time your body says, "This doesn't feel like mine." That's where the geometry ends and your shape begins. It's beautiful, isn't it? The mirror image, the balance, the sense of order so clean it hushes your breath. Symmetry, it soothes the eye, it organizes chaos, it comforts, but it also conceals. Because beauty is not always truth, and symmetry is not always honesty. Sometimes it's a lie drawn so perfectly that you don't think to question it. A lie disguised as balance, because something that looks stable must be stable, right? You've seen it everywhere. The logo that feels expensive, the face that feels trustworthy, the headline layout that feels authoritative. You don't read it yet, but already you believe it. Not because of what it says, but because of how it looks. Symmetry whispers, "This is safe. This is known. This has been cared for." But what if the care was only surface? What if the symmetry was calculated, a decoy, a veil, a performance of truth? Because when the world feels unpredictable, symmetry gives the illusion of control. And we need control, so we reach for the neat, the equal, the matching halves. But life is rarely symmetrical. Grief isn't, desire isn't, memory isn't. Still, we keep trying to draw our lives into mirrored shapes. We seek partners who reflect us. We seek beliefs that reinforce us. We seek routines that repeat. Not because they're real, but because they're symmetrical. And symmetry tells us we've done something right, even when we haven't. Even when we've silenced contradiction to keep the surface smooth. Even when we've cut off parts of ourselves to make the picture balance. That's the hidden cost of symmetry. It demands sacrifice. Imbalance is hard to look at. So we erase it. We sand the rough edge. We smooth the blemish. We tuck away the contradiction. But in doing so, we erase the story. We erase the nuance. We erase the truth. Because truth doesn't sit still in the center. It leans, it bends, it pulses off axis. It arrives in uneven intervals. But symmetry won't allow that. It frames the world into two sides, into reflection, into predictability. It leaves no room for the strange, no room for the in-between, no room for mystery. Think of justice, a symbol, balanced scales, two sides, equal weight. But when was justice ever balanced? When was history ever evenly measured? Still, we cling to the image, because the image is beautiful, because the image calms us, because the image pretends fairness into being. We let it, because the alternative is admitting how tilted things really are. Or think of beauty itself. Facial symmetry is praised, as if a mirrored face is more honest, more trustworthy, more worthy. But a face that's lived, a real face, doesn't mirror. It holds a symmetry like a map, a scar on one side, a shadow in one eye, a dimple that doesn't match. And still, it breathes more deeply than perfection ever could. Because imperfection moves, symmetry holds, and what it holds, it conceals. You've experienced it. The design that feels too perfect to be questioned. The argument that feels too clean to be true. The voice that speaks too evenly, too calmly to be honest. You know instinctively something's off, but the symmetry is seductive, so you override your knowing. And you comply. That's how symmetry becomes control. It becomes expectation. The symmetrical essay, the symmetrical calendar, the symmetrical story arc. We learn early that everything must resolve, that things must come full circle, that ideas must echo themselves, that endings must match beginnings. But life doesn't care for that rhythm. A person dies mid-sentence. A letter arrives after it matters. The apology comes too late. The realization comes too early. Life is asymmetrical, but we dress it in symmetry to make it digestible, to make it look complete, to make it sell. Because asymmetry requires presence. It requires witnessing. Symmetry only requires observation. A painting hung evenly, a layout centered, an interface balanced in thirds. You look, you nod, you move on. But the asymmetrical demands attention. It asks you to return, to recalibrate, to sit in discomfort, to stop expecting resolution. And we don't like that. We like the ending that mirrors the beginning, the character arc that rounds out, the story that ties off its loose ends. But the truest stories don't end that way. They fracture, they rupture, they blur into the next chapter, unresolved. That's not a flaw, that's truth. But symmetry sells better, so we replicate it. in design, in philosophy, in performance. We mirror others in conversation to appear empathetic. We balance our lives like budgets. We curate timelines that present mirrored growth. Even our emotions are arranged into symmetry. If I hurt you, I must be hurt in return. If I gave you joy, you owe me the same. But feelings are not math. Love is not mirrored. Forgiveness is not scale. Still we try. Still we reach for the illusion, because symmetry makes the unbearable feel bearable. It wraps grief in neatness. It wraps identity in shape. It wraps uncertainty in design. And when we look at it, we relax. That's the trap. The lie doesn't need to sound true. It only needs to look symmetrical. So tonight, look again at what you've called beautiful, at what you've called complete, at what you've trusted because it balanced, and ask, what's hiding behind the harmony? What was sacrificed to keep the shape clean? What truth was edited out to maintain the mirror? Because sometimes the truth lives just beyond the frame, in the shadow of the symmetry, where something trembles, where something leaks, where something dares to remain uneven and real. You are covered in them, not tattoos, not scars, something quieter, symbols, worn like skin, fused into posture, into rhythm, into the clothes you reach for without thinking. They aren't loud. They don't announce themselves. They don't need to, because they've been with you too long to be noticed. They've melted into you, and now you carry them. Not like a message, but like a memory, unspoken, unexamined, undeniable. You put on a brand and call it identity. You wear a logo and call it taste. But beneath that fabric is a deeper inscription, something older than fashion, something that hums in the way your hands move, the way your voice shifts in certain rooms, the way you pause when you walk into spaces marked not for you. These are symbols too. They aren't drawn. They're learned. They're worn into you like wind wears stone, slowly, invisibly, permanently. They begin in childhood. The color of your backpack, the stickers on your pencil case, the shoes you weren't allowed to wear, the television shows that coded your understanding of who was funny, who was smart, who was dangerous, who was beautiful. You didn't choose those symbols. They chose you. And once inside, they shaped your reflection. You learned what success looked like, what confidence sounded like, what belonging wore. And you chased that silhouette. You still do. The right shade of jeans, the right accessory. The accent softened in certain rooms, sharpened in others. You say, this is just me, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just familiar. Maybe it's a language of symbols you've learned to speak fluently. So fluently, you forgot it was a language. Like how you cross your legs in interviews, how you avoid eye contact with certain kinds of authority, how you smile when you don't mean it, how you stay silent when the room turns cold. These are gestures, yes, but they're also code. You don't think of them as symbols, but your nervous system does. It remembers the moment you were corrected for being too loud, the time you were praised for being polite, the shame that arrived when you were uncontained. And slowly, your body learned to decorate itself in silence, in compliance, in symbolic armor. And that armor became your aesthetic. You say you like neutral colors. You say you're not a statement person. You say you don't want to draw attention, but maybe you're just covered in symbols that say safety, stability, don't look here too closely. We all are, because the world responds faster to symbols than it does to truth. It reads the hoodie, not the history, the posture, not the pain, the tone, not the intention. And so we adapt. We align, we signal, we survive. But in doing so, we become walking diagrams, sign systems with skin. We become brands of ourselves, categories, identities optimized for recognition. We code switch, we curate, we compress. And the real self, the one underneath, it waits, not erased, just layered. Beneath the logo, beneath the tone, beneath the practiced smile. And sometimes you feel it stirring. In the wrong room, in the too honest conversation, in the mirror when no one's watching. That discomfort, that ache, it's not confusion, it's memory. It's the self whispering beneath the symbols, saying, I'm still here, not branded, not formatted, just present. But it's hard to listen, because the world praises fluency in symbols. The louder the logo, the clearer the message, the sharper the style, the stronger the signal. And yet, you begin to tire, not of the symbols themselves, but of the weight of them. They're not clothing anymore. They're expectations. They tell you who you're supposed to be, how much you're supposed to earn, how you're supposed to age, how soft you must be to be lovable, how efficient you must be to be valued. You don't remember agreeing to these terms, but you signed with every purchase, every silence, every time you said, I'm fine, when you weren't. That's the thing about silent symbols. They don't wait for consent. They move in with you. They speak for you when you don't speak. And after a while, they are you. Or at least, they seem to be. So what now? Do you tear them off? Unlearn every gesture? Erase the aesthetic you've come to call home? Maybe not. Maybe it's not about erasure. Maybe it's about recognition. To see the symbol is to soften its spell. To know what you're wearing is to choose it again. Or not. That's freedom, not rebellion, reclamation. So tonight, before you sleep, look at what you've carried. Not just in your bag or your pocket, in your voice, in your posture, in your silence. Ask, what does this gesture mean? Who taught me this tone? What am I saying without saying anything? And in the asking, something shifts. The symbol doesn't vanish, but it loosens. It detaches from your skin just enough for breath, just enough for truth, just enough for you to say, this is not me, or maybe it is, but now I know why. And knowing is the first step back to the self beneath the symbols, the one that doesn't perform, the one that doesn't adjust, the one that doesn't need translation, only space, only silence, only time. No blackboard, no textbook. No one said, this is the lesson, but you learned. You learned early, not through curriculum, through atmosphere, through repetition, through watching 100 small gestures add up to one large truth. You were taught without knowing you were being taught, because education doesn't always arrive with explanation. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Sometimes it arrives as absence. Sometimes it arrives at the moments no one remembers teaching. But you remember learning. You remember what it meant when someone looked away, when someone flinched, when someone praised your quiet more than your curiosity. You remember what got applause and what got ignored, and you internalized the lesson. Not consciously, not formally. You just adapted. That's how children survive. They notice what the room values, and they become it. Not because they understand, but because understanding is slower than obedience. You became fluent in the emotional weather of every space you entered. You learned how to move without disrupting, how to smile before you felt anything, how to anticipate expectations that were never spoken. You learned that good doesn't mean kind. It means predictable. It means quiet. It means don't need too much. This wasn't a class. This was life. You were being socialized, domesticated, formatted, and the formatting was subtle. No one said this is how you shrink yourself. They just rewarded the smaller version. No one said this is how you erase your voice. They just heard you better when you whispered. The lessons were never written down, but you memorized them anyway. You learned that certain people always got the benefit of the doubt, that certain tones were professional, that certain kinds of questions made people uncomfortable, that asking twice was too much, that crying made the room shift, that vulnerability came with a cost, and you paid it in advance, every day, just by adjusting. These adjustments became personality. They hardened into identity. You called it maturity. You called it being easy to work with. You called it fitting in. But maybe it was just absorbed obedience. 100 invisible lessons shaping you from the inside out, until you no longer knew where they ended, and you began. This is the quiet curriculum. The one written in hallway glances and parental sighs, in policies that never say what they really mean, in traditions no one questions, because questioning would break the spell. The spell of this is just how it's done. But it wasn't always this way. You didn't start here. You arrived full of questions. Before you were taught to ask the right ones, you touched things. You interrupted. You repeated yourself. You wandered. You didn't explain your curiosity. You just followed it. Until someone corrected it. Until someone reshaped it. Not with force. With preference. With silence. With praise for the version of you that stayed in line. That cleaned up well. That didn't cause scenes. That didn't embarrass anyone. And you learned, not that the world was cruel, that the world was fragile, too fragile to hold your wholeness, so you edited, you condensed, you performed, not because anyone told you to, but because no one had to. That's how powerful the unspoken can be. It doesn't confront, it surrounds, and you shape yourself to fit. But here's the secret. Just as you were taught without teaching. You can unlearn without instruction. You can begin again, not by reading the right book, not by taking the right course, but by noticing, by asking, why do I always do it this way? Whose comfort am I prioritizing when I make myself smaller? What am I afraid will happen if I tell the full truth? With my full voice, in the full room. These aren't easy questions. They don't have clean answers. But they open doors. And doors lead to rooms you forgot were yours. Rooms where curiosity isn't corrected. Where volume isn't punished. Where silence isn't confused with peace. Where emotions don't need translations. rooms where your first instinct was not a mistake. It was a beginning. You still carry those early teachings. They're in your muscle memory. But you don't have to live by them. You can let them soften. You can let them fade. You can hold them without being held by them. Because there's another kind of learning now. The kind you choose. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that says you're allowed to be whole, even when it's messy, even when it's too much, even when it's unfamiliar to others. Especially then. Because your presence is not a disruption. It is a signal, a reminder, that we are not here to be efficient. We are not here to be symbols of someone else's comfort. We are not here to shrink and simplify. We are here to arrive in rooms with our full weight, to ask the questions that unmake the spell, to notice the systems that trained us to nod before we understood, to speak in ways we were never taught, but always knew. So tonight, before sleep softens the grid of the day, ask yourself, what did I learn that I never agreed to? And who do I become when I begin to question it? Don't wait for permission. You've been taught without teaching. Now let yourself remember without explaining. You were always learning. Now let yourself unlearn. You never joined. There was no ceremony, no oath, no congregation, no name etched into a registry, but still, you belong. You've always belonged to a faith older than your memory, a quiet religion, built not on scripture, but on repetition, not on belief, but on instinct, a religion made of symbols, worshipped through recognition, practiced through glance and gesture and unconscious nod. You don't pray here, you participate. Every day, every scroll, every click, every breath inside a branded ritual. This is not a religion of gods. It is a religion of signs, of icons and logos, of pixels and placement, of light blinking softly in dark rooms, the circle that spins when the page loads, the check mark that confirms your payment, the blue tick beside a name. You say it's just design, but your nervous system disagrees. You feel relief when it loads. You feel trust when it's verified. You feel satisfaction when the box is checked. These are feelings, real ones, born not from belief, but from interaction. But isn't that what all rituals are? Interaction with the unseen, with something bigger than you, a system, a structure, a pattern. And this system, this structure, has its own liturgy. You know it by heart. The iconography of trust, the flow of authentication, the sacred order of digital tasks. We kneel not with our bodies, but with our time. We offer our data like prayers. We tithe with attention. We confess through search bars. And we're forgiven with clean interfaces. This is faith by frictionlessness, religion by design. You've been trained to follow symbols not because they're true, but because they work. And what works gets worshipped. What reduces confusion becomes divine. What provides structure becomes moral. What eliminates uncertainty becomes holy. But who decided these values? Who wrote the commandments of interaction? They don't hang on stone tablets. They appear in style guides, in UX principles, in documentation and default settings, in patterns repeated so often, they no longer feel like choices, just truths. And so we adapt, we memorize them, we echo them, we enforce them in others, gently or not. That's what religions do. They teach you what matters, and symbols are efficient teachers. They don't argue, they appear, they assert, they frame the world, and once you see them enough, you stop asking what they mean. You start assuming they mean everything. You trust the padlock icon, not because you read the certificate, but because the symbol feels secure. You trust the progress bar, not because it shows reality, but because it moves. The motion is the message, and the message is, this is working, this is safe. You are still inside the system, but what system, and who benefits? The quiet religion of symbols doesn't ask you to question that. It thrives on silence. It thrives on fluency. It thrives on your ability to perform faith without even noticing. And you do. You align with its aesthetics. You obey its speeds. You internalize its logic. You say, I'm just following the steps. But the steps are the ritual. And ritual, performed often enough, becomes identity. You don't say, I believe in this. You say, this is how things are done. And in that phrase, 1,000 choices vanish. Because symbols aren't passive, they are persuasive. The more beautiful they are, the more powerful their spell. The cleaner the design, the more sacred the command. The more seamless the interaction, the more total the authority. You've never met the high priests of this religion, but you've followed their commandments. Not because you were coerced, because you were comforted. Comfort is the softest form of control. When everything feels intuitive, no one asks who decided what's intuitive. When everything is fast, no one asks what is being left behind. When everything looks perfect, no one asks what mess had to be hidden. This is a religion that hides its altars, but they're everywhere. The phone held like a relic, the lock screen like a stained glass window, the notification chime like a bell tower. You don't call it worship, but try leaving it, try disconnecting. Try stepping away from the feed, the frame, the icon. You'll feel the withdrawal, the ache, the disorientation, because this system is not just external, it's internal. The symbols live in you now. They regulate your time, they shape your desires, they structure your sense of self. And they do it silently. You're not asked to believe. You're asked to participate. And in participating, belief is built. Not in doctrine, in pattern. And what's the pattern? That life is a sequence of responses, that everything must be legible, that every action must be efficient, that meaning must be quantified, that value must be seen, that truth must load instantly. But you know better. Part of you still knows. That real understanding is slow. That beauty resists clarity. That presence can't be captured in a notification. That love can't be confirmed with a heart icon. That the soul, if such a thing exists, does not glow blue when verified. So what now? You don't need to renounce this religion. You live in it, we all do, but you can notice. You can pause before obeying. You can see the symbol and then ask, what is this asking me to believe? And, do I? You can let space return. Not to disconnect, to remember. That behind the symbol is a story. That behind the story is a decision. And that decision was not made by divinity. It was made by people. Fallible, biased, brilliant, afraid, just like you. So tonight, as the icons glow softly across your screen, as the notifications settle like digital incense in the temple of your attention. Let one truth settle beside them. You are allowed to question what you've always followed. The quiet religion of symbols will not resist. It is not built to fight. It is built to continue. But you were not built for continuation alone. You were built for meaning. And meaning begins the moment you ask, "What is this, and what am I giving it?" And in the asking, the ritual breaks, and something sacred begins.